The UK covered from 12 to 3 is GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
A very good afternoon, everybody. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, with you all the way through until 6 o'clock. And coming up, well, in just under 15 minutes' time, we'll cross live to Aberdeen to hear from Nicola Sturgeon, the modern-day William Wallace or a pound shop Braveheart. She'll be talking at the SNP conference. Will she hold an illegal independence referendum, even if the UK government says no? Will she slate the Tories yet again? We'll bring you that live and get loads of reaction as I ask, should the UK leave Scotland and not the other way around? Sirens and explosions ring out across Kyiv as Putin retaliates. Russia is bombarding the Ukrainian capital. Missile strikes have apparently killed at least 10 people and injured 60. Apparently even a children's play area has been hit. We're going live to Ukraine, and we're also going to go live to Minsk, where apparently Belarus's troops are now joining up with Putin's lot. What does all that mean? Are we about to witness another massive escalation in this conflict? And they're at it again. Just stop oil just won't stop, will they? This morning, the eco-warriors blocked the Mall outside Buckingham Palace, gluing their hands together, classic, in protest against new fossil fuel licences. I've actually got Just Stop Oil coming into the studio now, so get the adhesive ready. But before all of that, it is, of course, your latest headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. It's just coming up to 2 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. G7 leaders are going to hold urgent talks tomorrow to discuss their response to the Russian airstrikes in Ukraine. Authorities say at least 11 people were killed and 64 injured as explosions hit several cities, including the capital. The UK is keeping a close eye on what's being described as the increasingly reckless tactics by Russia, with the Foreign Secretary saying firing missiles in civilian areas is unacceptable. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv and 8 regions have been damaged.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people, such as time. Such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. We restore everything that is destroyed.
The Mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, is appealing for more help from the West.
Millions of people living in the city of Kyiv. And this war and so-called free world must help us Ukrainians, continuing help us Ukrainians to stop this genocide of the Ukrainian population.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin says it was right to retaliate after the Crimea blast at the weekend. He accused Ukraine of a targeted attack, with a major bridge being damaged when a truck exploded. Putin warned if attacks continue against Russia, he will respond.
If attempts to carry out acts of terrorism on our territory continue, Russia's response will be harsh, and its scale will correspond to that of the threat made against the Russian Federation. No one should be in any doubt about that.
The European Union's condemned Russia's actions. A spokesperson for the EU foreign policy chief says the airstrikes amount to a war crime.
Russia is opting for a tactics with aiming and indiscriminately bombing the civilians. This is something which is against international humanitarian law, and this indiscriminate targeting of civilians amounts to a war crime.
In some other news now, the Chancellor's bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Now, last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original date in mid-November. Today, though, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, he said it will now be brought forward to be published on October the 31st. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has welcomed the move.
I'm pleased that they've brought forward this date to begin the process. But what I want to see, and what I would do now, is reverse that kamikaze mini budget. That's got to be reversed. We need to have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies to pay or help to pay for the energy price freeze. And what that will do, and most important of all, is to stabilise the economy, because this chaotic, irresponsible approach is all of the government's own making.
Scotland's First Minister is expected to tell SNP delegates shortly that independence for the country will lead to a better relationship between the UK's four nations. Nicola Sturgeon, who's due to close the party conference in Aberdeen, will also accuse the UK government of denying Scottish democracy. Now, we'll bring you her speech live. It's due to start imminently, and we'll bring it to you here on GB News. A former nurse has pleaded not guilty to the murders of multiple babies. Lucy Letby is accused of killing 7 children and attempting to kill 10 others between 2015 and 2016. She was working at the Countess of Chester Hospital at the time of their deaths. The trial at Manchester Crown Court is expected to take up to 6 months. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action will end at 6 o'clock tonight. The chair of the Criminal Bar Association, Kirsty Brimlow, told GB News, though, there's still a lot of anger amongst members.
The offer really did hit the demands of the criminal bar. However, a number of barristers still consider that it hasn't gone far enough. There's still a lot of trust in government that has to be realised, and we hope that this is the start of a constructive arrangement.
You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head back to Patrick.
Welcome to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and in just a few minutes' time, the Queen of Scots herself, Nicola Sturgeon, will be live here on GB News, rattling the can for Scottish independence. She'll be speaking at the SNP conference, and she thinks that Westminster is standing in the way of Scottish democracy by denying another once-in-a-generation independence referendum. We're going to have a Scottish theme running through the show today, a bit like a thread of tartan wool. I've got loads of questions to ask. Could Sturgeon run a bath, let alone a country? What could happen to Scotland's NHS, the education system, drug deaths, trans people in female prisons? But the overarching question for me is, should the UK vote to boot out Scotland as opposed to the other way around? I'll be speaking to a provocative panel about that, but first, the British public had their say. We are the People's Channel. Here's what the people had to say. Do they care if Scotland does one?
I don't know the economics of the situation, so I would need to know more detail. From the little that I do know, the answer is no. I think that whenever you combine, it's the same as anything. If you put all your eggs in one basket, that's not a good strategy. if you diversify more. So I think by us being united, we would have more diversification.
I kind of think they should have the opportunity to leave if they wanted to. They could probably do it themselves, go alone.
Do you think they would thrive on their own?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, it's part of the country. There's a lot of history. Of course, I mean, this whole island, it has a lot of natural beauty that expands across the geography. I think that's actually very sad to lose. But of course, I understand the economic and the societal and cultural, historical complexity involved in all of this.
If you actually look at the economics of it, initially Scotland would actually dip down for about 10 years before it picks up.
Imagine the situation that Boris Johnson, we voted for, what was it, 52-48 for Brexit, leave Europe. Yeah. Europe says, no, you can't leave. What would happen?
But no one's saying that, are they, Scott?
Imagine that England's saying that to Scotland.
But the English people don't get a vote on whether or not Scotland should leave.
Why should they? They're not Scottish.
Well, the UK.
I'm Scottish. I don't get a vote. I don't live in Scotland. I live in London.
Well, so you would vote for independence? You would vote for independence. So why would you vote?
It gives people control over their own lives.
Do you think she'd want to rejoin the EU straight away then?
I guess so. Yeah, I would.
Right, well, there we go, a range of views. In a few moments' time, we'll cross live to Aberdeen to hear from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, herself, as she addresses delegates at the Scottish National Party conference. She is expected to say that Scottish independence will create a partnership of equals in the UK. The First Minister has set a very specific date for when she would like Indy Ref 2, the second in a generation independence vote. That's the 19th of October 2023, but it's now up to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not essentially it's legal. Will she just go ahead with it anyway, even if it isn't? We'll have to wait and see. We'll bring you that speech live in just a few moments and get a shed load of reaction to that, because huge questions asked about this now, and whether or not, frankly, the rest of the UK might be better off without Scotland. First, let's cross to GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is at the SNP conference in Aberdeen. Darren's been doing a tour of conferences recently. Darren, what's she going to say?
Well, it's going to talk about three key things, I think. First of all, you're right, independence is going to be front and centre. There is a frustration, many would say, within the SNP that they feel that they've won successive elections in Scotland, that they won the Holyrood election last year, that there's a majority of MSPs for a second referendum, and thus, in theory, it should happen. But as you've alluded to, the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the constitutional right at the moment simply to call that referendum in October of next year. They're going to the Supreme Court to settle this dispute. Is it MSPs in Holyrood or is it MPs at Westminster who should have the final say? Almost certainly we think the Supreme Court is going to conclude it is MPs at Westminster, and Liz Truss has made it clear there's not going to be a referendum anytime soon, and that's why Nicola Sturgeon then come up with this other idea of using the 2024 general election as a de facto referendum, though I'm not entirely sure constitutionally how that's going to work. But there is this movement, this sense that, you know, they want to have their say again, though for many people outside of this conference centre, they're also frustrated with the Scottish Government, saying that actually, you know what, Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister will be much better suited, concentrating on the cost of living crisis, on standards in schools, on the health service up here in Scotland, and on energy security instead. And I think we are going to get a bit of that, more than a bit actually, in this speech. I think Nicola Sturgeon is going to talk an awful lot about the cost of living crisis. She's going to talk about renewable energy. Scotland's the windiest place in Europe. It's pretty well placed actually to do well out of energy insecurity in some ways. So she will talk about those other issues, and politically, you know, she's going to attack her opponent. She got herself in a little bit of trouble yesterday with some spicy language, but I suspect we will see attacks on the Conservative Party and indeed on Labour too, because Labour are now starting to do quite well in the polls here in Scotland, and I think the SNP view that as somewhat a bit of a threat to them as well.
Darren, thank you very much. As ever, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor there up in Aberdeen. Well, with independence the key focus, let's discuss whether or not it would actually be a good thing for Scotland. Could it be a good thing for the rest of the UK if Scotland did one? I can now speak with Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, Russell Findlay, who is against Scottish independence, as I understand it. I'm also with Alba Party member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and, oh gosh, Cowden Beef, sorry about that, Neil Humvey, who is pro-independence. Right, I will start with you, Neil. Look, why do you particularly think that independence would be a great thing for Scotland?
Well, let's deal with some of your assertions right away. The fact of the matter is that Scotland has historically, and still does now, contribute much more to Her Majesty's Treasury than it costs to run the country, and we have an underdeveloped economy, whereas we have a completely overheated economy down south. So the question is not, will Scotland be able to survive outside of the United Kingdom? The question is, will Her Majesty's Treasury be able to get enough in terms of tax receipts without the vast natural resources of Scotland being fed into that? So that's the starting point for the economic side. The second point I'd make is this debate at the moment, including Nicola Sturgeon's voice within it, is being held within the belief that the constitutional situation in the United Kingdom is fixed and therefore Scotland has to operate within that. We're asking questions, or the Scottish Government are asking questions, as an organ of the UK state to another organ of the UK state. And what we should be doing is discussing this as a recognised people internationally to the international community, and this is a matter for the UN. And I'm afraid Nicola Sturgeon is playing catch up with that discussion.
OK, all right, Russell, I'll throw it over to you. Lots to get stuck into there. I think one of the overarching points potentially for Scots would be that presumably if they got independence, Nicola Sturgeon will be in charge of it. And when you look at some of her track record with key aspects of the Scottish state at the minute, people might say, hang on a minute, she can't run a bath, let alone a country.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fair point. The track record of this SNP government in Edinburgh is absolutely atrocious, just about by every single measure. But let's get one thing clear. The SNP do not speak for Scotland, and the Alba Party certainly do not speak for Scotland. The majority of people in Scotland decided in 2014 they wanted to remain part of a strong United Kingdom, and all the polling just now shows that there is no desire for another damaging and divisive independence referendum. And going back to the economic argument, Mr Hanvey talks about Scotland being, I think, a sort of net contributor. That's just not true. We benefit through the union dividend of something in the region of over £2,000 per man, woman and child in this country. And it's completely wrong to suggest otherwise. But for me, and I think for many other Scots who are comfortable and quite proud of being both Scottish and British.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that back actually over to you, if that's all right, Neil, because I've got some stats here, and look, you know, you may be able to correct me on this one. I'm just reading them out now. In 2020-2021, Scotland, including a geographical share of the North Sea revenue, raised 62.8 billion, that's for the UK coffers, compared to the 99.2 billion of public spending for Scotland. So did you say that Scotland contributes more to the UK than it gets? Because that doesn't seem to be true.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look back before the introduction of GERS, which are massaged figures, Scotland historically, every year since records began, contributed more. GERS has been used to massage the economic position of Scotland quite deliberately into a negative balance, but it's a complete fantasy. It's not real economics. That's not how an independent country operates. That's not how a country with its own central bank operates. So these are fantasy figures you're referring to. They absolutely do not reflect the true prowess of Scotland when you think that Scotland has 96% of the UK crude oil, 63% of the UK's natural gas, 98% of the hydropower, and 25% of Europe's renewable power. So, I mean, it is an absolute fiction that a country blessed with so much energy resources, particularly in the current situation, would be and somehow be, a supplicant to a benevolent UK. It's ludicrous.
You've had your say, and we're getting a bit squeezed because we've got to go. We might have to throw over to Sturgeon at any minute. So, Russell, I just want to throw back to you, Russell Finlay. What currency would Scotland use if it was independent?
There's lots to go out there.
Hang on, sorry, Russell, just quickly, so your colleague on the other side there said that Scotland will continue to use the pound if they're independent.
No, Scottish pound. Our own pound.
Scottish pound, right, OK, fair enough.
one of the things he did say, which was about oil, 96% of UK reserves are in Scottish waters, right? The SNP government in Edinburgh opposing any further extraction.
I'm not in the SNP.
Well, yeah, we know, but the SNP conference, we were talking a bit about surgery.
You're using
Carry on,
oil
Russell.
to justify your financial argument. The Edinburgh government is wholly opposed to it.
Russell, go on. Sorry.
Quite the opposite.
Russell, just continue to make that point, because a lot of people in Scotland might be thinking, well, I'd like the right to self-determination, OK? And that's fair enough. I voted for Brexit, so I'm pretty shaky ground when it comes to this kind of stuff. Well, not really. I'm pretty easy one way or the other. But, do you think that actual self-determination in Scotland, if they had independence, would lead to much? What would they do now that they can't? What would they do that they can't do now?
Well, first of all, let's remember we had our say in 2014. The people of Scotland took part in the biggest exercise, democratic exercise in our history, and we said no thank you. And that was that, supposedly for a generation. But of course the SNP and people like Mr Hanvey, who used to be in the SNP, decided from day one they would not respect democracy. They cannot accept the result of that referendum and the will of the Scottish people. And all the polling shows that we do not want another divisive referendum, because all it will do is fuel the division.
Well, on that, and just quickly, because we were apparently about 30 seconds away from Sturge taking to the stage, so Mr Hanvey, you're going to have to be pretty quick on this, but it's not one referendum, it's two, isn't it? Because it's independence from the UK and then a vote to join the EU.
Look, I mean, I'm not a big fan of a referendum as a democratic mandate. I think we know the mechanism. It's been
sorry, everybody. Sorry. Stay where you are. Nicola Sturgeon's on the stage right now. We're going to throw to her live at the SP conference in Aberdeen.
My friends, it is so good to be speaking at conference in person again, rather than just virtually. Getting to hug friends and colleagues is so much better. Our political family, Scotland's biggest party by far, is back together again, and that feels great. Now, the only downside of not being on Zoom is having to trade my slippers for these heels. But I suppose I can't have absolutely everything. Of course, it is always good to be here in Aberdeen, especially now that the SNP is once again leading this great city. Aberdeen and the North East is at the heart of our just transition to a net zero future. Since our late Queen, whose extraordinary life of service we have honoured in recent weeks, switched on the Forties pipeline in 1975, oil and gas has powered the Scottish economy. Her late Majesty back then inaugurated the oil and gas age. As we move now, in so many ways, into a new era, we have a duty to repay all those who work in that industry. A duty to support them into new jobs in green energy, an opportunity to usher in the new age of Scottish renewables. Conference, Aberdeen is the oil and gas capital of Europe. Let us resolve today to now make it the net zero capital of the world. That ambition led us to establish the £500 million Just Transition Fund for this region. Today, I can announce the first 22 projects have just been awarded funding of more than £50 million. These projects will support the production of green hydrogen, the development of wave and tidal technology, and even pioneer the use of waste from whisky to recycle EV batteries. They will focus on the skills our existing workforce need to take advantage of the renewables revolution. Incredible Scottish ingenuity here in the North East, supported by the Scottish Government, developing technologies to tackle the global climate emergency. It is exciting, inspiring stuff, and it is a shining example of what a Scottish Government can do when the powers lie in our hands. Conference, when we last gathered together, just weeks from the start of a global pandemic, we could not have imagined what lay ahead. Thankfully, COVID no longer dominates the news or our thoughts quite as much as it did. But the virus still poses a risk, especially as we approach winter. So before I go any further today, a plea. If you are eligible, get your booster jab. Vaccination is just as important now as it was last winter. If you don't do it for yourself, though you really should, do it for those more vulnerable than you. And please do it for the National Health Service. We owe the NHS and all who work in it a massive debt of gratitude. Conference, all of us hoped that when the worst of the pandemic was over, better times would lie ahead. Thanks to the brilliance of vaccine scientists and the sheer strength of the human spirit, I am certain those better days will come. But in the midst of a cost of living crisis, it won't surprise you to hear me talk today about the challenges we face and about the massive responsibility of me and my government to help you through it. As we navigate these stormy waters, Scotland needs a steady and compassionate hand on the tiller. Conference, that is what our Scottish Government provides. But today, I will also make the case for optimism, for not just accepting the world as it is, but turning our minds and our hearts instead to building a stronger Scotland and playing our part in building a better, fairer world. The optimism that a better world is possible is inspired for me by the bravery of those who endure the toughest of times, and at home by the knowledge that this beautiful, magnificent country of ours is bursting with talent, creativity and ingenuity. We also have a sense of solidarity and common purpose that, yes, our political debate can sometimes obscure. Conference, Scotland has got what it takes to be a successful, independent country. It has it in abundance. Never let anyone tell us otherwise. Of course, at this moment, across the world, that better future can be hard to see. eclipsed as it is by significant and profound challenges. A war of unprovoked aggression on our continent, an energy price crisis and soaring inflation, democratic norms eroded and human rights attacked in too many countries. In the face of that, we have a duty to champion progressive values and universal rights. Friends, that is a duty our party will always discharge. But in the UK, we have a Westminster government intent on taking us down a different path. The current Home Secretary, speaking at the Conservative Party conference, said this about asylum seekers. And even as I quote her, I struggle to comprehend that she actually said these words. But here they are. I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream. It's my obsession. Conference, my dream is very different. I'm sure it is shared in this hall and by the vast majority across Scotland. My dream is that we live in a world where those fleeing violence and oppression are shown compassion and treated like human beings, not shown the door and bundled onto planes like unwanted cargo. Friends, our case for hope and optimism rests above all on our common humanity, compassion, solidarity, love. These values sustained us in the darkest days of the pandemic. They must drive us forward now. Those fighting across the globe for democracy, equality and human dignity must hear that they are not alone. So let the message go out from us to everyone across the world standing up against tyranny and oppression. We stand with you. To women in Iran fighting for basic human rights, we stand with you. To girls in Afghanistan demanding the right to go to school, we stand with you. To men and women risking their lives in opposition to Putin in Russia or his sidekick in Belarus, we stand with you. And to the people of Ukraine fighting for your very existence, we stand with you. Today, we live on a continent where a so-called strong man, the one who has never looked weaker or more insecure, has launched a brutal invasion of his neighbour. That should be unimaginable in 21st century Europe. But for the people of Ukraine, it is all too real. Every day there are atrocities and killings. Today, the capital Kyiv and cities across the country are under renewed bombardment. Despicable war crimes have been committed. And Conference, let us be clear. These are war crimes for which Vladimir Putin must be held to account. The contrast between Putin and the people of Ukraine could not be starker. From President Zelensky to the sacrifice of ordinary citizens, personified here on Saturday by our guest, Lesia Vasylenko, we have seen incredible bravery and extraordinary determination. Ukraine, you are an inspiration to the world, and we will always stand with you. Conference, we are not on the front line of this war, but Ukraine's victory in the battle between democracy and tyranny is vital for all of us. The Scottish Government will continue to do everything we can to help. We are helping enforce sanctions and isolate Russia. We have provided funds for vital military equipment, and we have opened Scotland's doors to those displaced. Initially, we committed to welcoming 3,000 people seeking refuge from the war. I am pleased to say that we are now providing safety for more than 20,000. To each and every one, our hearts go out to you. We know you yearn to go home, but for as long as you need a place of sanctuary, be in no doubt, you have a home here in Scotland. Conference, there are moments in history, as now with Ukraine, when all of us must be prepared to make sacrifices to help defend fundamental freedoms. But when global turbulence strikes, national governments have a duty to act in ways that mitigate rather than exacerbate the impacts on their own populations. When it comes to the cost of living crisis and so much else besides, this UK government is utterly failing in that duty. Each and every day, its actions are making matters worse. We last gathered together as a party in October 2019. Back then, the Tories had just elected a new leader. Westminster was in meltdown. A new Prime Minister was driving through a disastrous policy agenda despite warnings of its dire economic impact. And here we are, all over again. Another spin on the Tory misery-go-round. But this time the carousel is speeding up. It took the Tories 3 long years, to realise that Boris Johnson was a disaster. With Liz Truss, it took them just 3 weeks. She caused mayhem in the markets with her decision to borrow billions of pounds to fund tax cuts for the richest, borrowing to be repaid by eye-watering austerity cuts and a raid on the incomes of the poorest. It is unconscionable. The Prime Minister's justification is that she is going for growth. Conference, let me tell you what kind of growth that will be. Growth in the gap between rich and poor, growth in the rates of poverty, growth in the pressure on our NHS and other public services, and without any doubt, growth in the deep disgust that the public feel for all of it. The truth is, massive handouts for the wealthiest at the expense of everyone else do nothing for the economy. All they do is turbocharge inequality. So let me be clear about this. No SNP government will ever inflict on Scotland such an immoral, self-defeating disaster of a policy. Instead, we will continue to use our powers and resources to help those most in need, and not as an act of charity, but in our collective interest. Conference, here is what I stand for, what we stand for. Not hoping, against all evidence to the contrary, that wealth will suddenly and magically start trickling down, but instead lifting people up so they can contribute their full potential. That is the SNP's founding principle for a stronger economy. I am proud of the work the Scottish Government is doing to tackle child poverty. The Scottish child payment is unique in the United Kingdom. It is paid to eligible families with children up to age 6. It started at £10 per week. At conference last year, I announced we would double it to 20. Friends, 5 weeks from today, we will increase it again to £25 a week. Vital financial help for more than 100,000 children delivered in time for Christmas. On the same day we increase the payment, we will also extend it to families with children up to age 16. Now, Conference, I know I'm a bit biased, but I think that's the sign of a government with the right priorities. But we need to do more, because we know this winter is going to be really tough. Rather than looking forward to Christmas, too many families will be dreading it. Dreading it because they don't know if they can afford to heat their homes or even pay for food. As part of our help to the poorest families over the past year, we have made quarterly bridging payments of £130. These have gone to children and young people in receipt of free school meals but who don't qualify for the child payment. Today, I can announce that the final instalment, ahead of the extension of the child payment and due in the next few weeks, will not be £130. We will double it to £260. Friends, that will help put food on the Christmas table for families of 145,000 children and young people. Now, I don't pretend it will make all of their worries go away. No government with our limited powers can ever do that. But I do hope this investment of almost £20 million will bring a bit of Christmas cheer to those who need it most. Conference, we have used the powers of our Parliament to deliver the unique child payment. Last Thursday, we took further action to help combat the cost of living crisis. The Scottish Government's emergency bill to protect tenants was passed by Parliament. The result, a rent freeze in operation in Scotland over the winter until at least the end of March next year. But as we have acted to help those in need, what about the UK Government? You know, it is difficult to overstate the calamity of their actions. Back in 2014, The Westminster establishment told us that it was the UK's standing in the world, its economic strength and its stability that made independence impossible. Now they say it's the UK's isolation, its weakness and instability, the very conditions they created, that means change can't happen. As far as Westminster is concerned, it's heads they win and tails we lose, but this time it will not wash. Because what that is delivering for Scotland is this: Brexit, more austerity, homeowners facing real hardship and hundreds of thousands in poverty. Conference, that is not strength and stability, it is chaos and catastrophe. And friends, all of that is on the Tories. But we should remember that their ability to do it has too often been aided and abetted by Labour. In 2014, Labour joined forces with the Tories. They said then that Westminster Tory government was better for Scotland than self-government, and incredibly, they are doing it all over again. It wasn't easy to understand back then, but given everything that has happened since, it is utterly inexplicable now. Take Brexit, imposed on Scotland against our will and doing real lasting damage to our interests, our economy and our young people. Labour is now just as committed to Brexit, a hard Brexit, as the Tories. You know, at least the Tories believe in it. Labour doesn't. Yet rather than make the principled argument, which they could actually now win in England, they cower away from it. They abandon all principle for fear of upsetting the apple cart. Bluntly, they are willing to chuck Scotland under Boris Johnson's Brexit bus to get the keys to Downing Street. Friends, letting down Scotland, same old Labour. For Scotland, there is a fundamental democratic issue here, and it has real-life consequences. Whether it's Tory or Labour, Labour or Tory, it's not us who gets to decide. Our votes don't determine who gets to occupy number 10. For Scotland, the problem is not just which party is in power at Westminster, the problem is Westminster. And to fix that, to make sure we get the governments that the largest number of us vote for, always, not just occasionally. For that, my friends, we need Scotland's independence.
Well, that was an interesting time for it to cut out, wasn't it? But I think we got the gist there. Scotland, of course, under Nicola Sturgeon. Shock horror wants independence. A few other key points that I've just noted down there from what Nicola Sturgeon was saying. Essentially, the SNP are definitely not going to send anyone to Rwanda. The jury's out potentially on what they would do for anyone else who is an asylum seeker / illegal immigrant. Interesting stuff there that she was saying as well, that she attacked both Labour and the Tories pretty much in equal measure. She said that Scotland has what it takes to be an independent country. The country needs a compassionate and steady hand on the tiller. This is Nicola Sturgeon. She pledged solidarity with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. She also said that those migrants crossing the Channel will be treated with compassion, and it's my pleasure to bring back Sturgeon.
But it is about hope for a better future. We all want Scotland to be a country in which no child goes to bed hungry, a place where everyone can afford to heat their home, where our vast energy resources benefit all who live here and help save the planet. None of that should be radical, but it must be the foundation of everything we aspire to. For as long as I am First Minister, and by the way, Conference, I intend that to be for quite some time yet. My job, our job, is not done. For as long as I am First Minister, I will do everything in my power to build the better Scotland we all want to see. Now, I know some people ask, and it is not an illegitimate question, why propose a referendum in the midst of a cost of living crisis? Conference, the answer is in the question. The answer is the cost of living crisis. It is the Tory response to it. It is the financial chaos, and it is the damage of Brexit. All of that is laying bare each and every single day the harm being done to people in Scotland because we are not independent. Now, over the next 2 days, the Supreme Court will consider whether the current law allows the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an advisory referendum. If Westminster had any respect at all for Scottish democracy, this court hearing would not be necessary. But Westminster has no such respect. That means this issue was always destined to end up in court sooner or later. Better, in my view, that it is sooner. If the court decides in the way we hope it does, on 19th October next year, there will be an independence referendum. And if the court doesn't decide that way, well, first and obviously, we will respect that judgment. We believe in the rule of law. And as a party and a movement, we will, of course, reflect. But fundamentally, it will leave us with a very simple choice. Put our case for independence to the people in an election, or give up on Scottish democracy. Conference, I don't know about you. Actually, I suspect I do know about you. But I will never, ever give up on Scottish democracy. For now, the question of process, the how of securing independence, is in the hands of judges. but it is for us to crack on with answering the question, why? Polls last week show that support for independence is rising. But remember, polls are just momentary snapshots in time. They go up and they go down. Much more significant are the findings of the latest British Social Attitude Survey. 10 years ago, support for independence was at 23%. 5 years ago, 45%. Now, in that gold standard measure of public opinion, support for independence stands at 52%. As we know, it is even higher amongst young people. So it is tempting sometimes to assume an inevitability about independence, that the arc of history is moving firmly in its direction. I hope and believe that will turn out to be true. But we would be wrong, utterly wrong, to take it for granted. Our job is to make the case and win the argument. That means not just talking to ourselves, but reaching out to others not yet persuaded. I remember in the 2014 campaign speaking at a public meeting in Leith. It was jam-packed, so busy in fact that the organisers asked those who had already decided to vote yes to leave, so that those still undecided could hear the arguments. That is the approach I want us to take now, though for the avoidance of doubt I am not asking you to get up and leave. But I do want us to resolve today that from here on we will speak less to each other and more to those outside our ranks. I know that some watching at home right now will never be persuaded to vote yes. You oppose independence as strongly and from as much principle as we support it. I respect that. That is democracy. And please remember, whatever happens in future, Scotland belongs to you as much as it does to us. Scotland belongs to all of us. And for those who want to be convinced but still have questions and doubts, it is our job to persuade, reassure and inspire. Conference, one of the great ironies of the independence debate is that so many of the institutions that people associate with Britishness, institutions that have shaped our shared history, like the NHS, a fair social security system, public service broadcasting. The threat to these institutions comes not from an independent Scotland. It comes from UK governments that are dismantling or undermining these institutions. With independence, we can do more to protect them. Let's take one of those institutions, our most precious public service. The NHS is under enormous pressure right now. It delivers outstanding care within waiting time targets for the vast majority of those who need it. Today, I want us to pay tribute to each and every individual who works within our National Health Service. But the pressures on the NHS mean that despite their dedication, too many people are waiting too long. That is why we are delivering record investment. And it is why we are doing everything we can to give our NHS workers a fair pay rise, because Conference, few in our society deserve it more than they do. Fast diagnosis and reliable quality health care matters whatever your condition, but it is especially important for those with cancer. The best chance of surviving cancer remains early detection and treatment. Over the past year, we have established 3 new fast-track cancer diagnostic centres in Ayrshire and Arran, Dumfries and Galloway and Fife. They have already supported hundreds of patients. More than 1 in 7 were found to have cancer, and around half of them were from the poorest parts of our country. So these centres are helping tackle health inequality too. Conference fast-track cancer diagnosis centres work. That's why I'm delighted to confirm today that 2 more centres will open next year, 1 in the Borders and 1 in Lanarkshire. And by the end of this Parliament, there will be a fast-track cancer diagnosis centre in every health board in Scotland. That is just one example of how we are supporting our NHS. That job is the most important our government has right now. Management of the NHS is our responsibility. It is no one else's. But the fact is, our ability to fund it properly depends on decisions taken at Westminster. When they cut our budget or when they crash our economy, that makes it harder for us to protect the health service. And if, as some Tories are now openly arguing, they move away from the very basis on which it was founded and towards an insurance-based alternative, that will destroy our National Health Service. With independence, that will never happen. We will always protect its founding principles. You know, with independence, we could choose to embed a universal NHS in a written constitution, a constitutional right to health care, free at the point of need. Conference, if the SNP is in government, that is exactly what we will do. Turning our back on the rest of the UK. It is not. It is about recasting our relationship as one of equals. Across these islands, we share history, family connections and friendships. These things matter just as much to supporters of independence as to anyone else. In fact, I am willing to bet that the nations of these islands will work together even better with independence than we do now. Scotland will still be a member of the British-Irish Council. The difference is that, like the Republic of Ireland now, we will be there as an independent country. You know, there is a point here that, at first glance, might seem curious. But in my view, it is becoming increasingly true. Independence is actually the best way to protect the partnership on which the United Kingdom was founded, a voluntary partnership of nations. Right now, and make no mistake about this, it is an aggressive unionism that is undermining that partnership. Westminster's denial of Scottish democracy, full frontal attacks on devolution, a basic lack of respect. If there is tension, that is what is causing it. It is, my friends, Scottish independence a new partnership of the Isles that can renew the whole idea of our nations working together for the common good. England, Scotland, Wales, the island of Ireland. We will always be the closest of friends. We will always be family. But we can achieve a better relationship, a true partnership of equals, when we win Scotland's independence. Conference, I am well aware that what gives many people most pause for thought on independence is the economy. People can see all too clearly now that the UK does not offer economic strength or financial security. And yet, still, and rightly, they want to know that independence will make Scotland's economy stronger, not weaker. That is fair. And especially now, that is entirely understandable. Of course, it is equally fair to point out that so much of the uncertainty and crisis we face is not because of independence, it is the opposite. Once again, it is because we are not independent. Conference. Independence is not a miracle economic cure. But let this message ring out today. We can do better than this. We can do so much better than this. And let's remember these three basic facts. First, Scotland is not benefiting right now from the so-called broad shoulders of the United Kingdom. Second, and let there be no doubt about this, we have got everything it takes to be a successful, independent country. Extraordinary resources, industries and talent in abundance. And third, independence is not an untested idea. Independence is normal. For countries of Scotland's size or even smaller, independence is an outstanding success. Earlier this year, the Scottish Government published evidence illustrating that point. Conference, listen now to these facts and then think of the untapped potential Scotland has. Compared to the UK, these other countries with so many similarities to Scotland are wealthier, more equal, they have higher productivity, lower poverty rates, lower child poverty and lower pensioner poverty. They have higher social mobility, they spend more on research and development, they have higher business investment. In short, these countries combine economic dynamism with social solidarity. They are amongst the most successful societies the world has ever known, and it is their success, not a failing UK economy, that Scotland must now aim to match. With independence, we won't emulate that success overnight. But the big, burning question is this. If all of these countries can achieve all of that, why not Scotland? Conference, I can confirm that 1 week today we will publish the next in our Building a New Scotland series of papers. It will make the economic case for independence. It will set out how we can build a new sustainable economy based on our massive renewable energy resources. It will show how, in an energy-rich, independent Scotland, we can deliver lower prices and stronger security of supply. And on energy, let me give this commitment. Unlike our UK counterparts, the Scottish Government will not be issuing licences for fracking. In the economic prospectus, we will set out how, in an independent Scotland, we can secure fair work. We will repeal Westminster's anti-trade union legislation. We will end age discrimination for those on the minimum wage. We will show how businesses can benefit from independence. With EU membership, they'll be back inside the world's biggest single market. With a fairer migration policy and freedom of movement restored, they will have access to workers from Europe and across the world. They will have new opportunities to influence government policy through a social partnership approach. In short, we will show how we can break with the low productivity, high inequality, Brexit-based UK economy and use the full powers of independence to build an inclusive, fair, well-being economy that works for everyone. An economy that works for everyone. That is the prize of independence. Conference, moving to independence and making it work will of course take time, hard work and good judgment. There will be many challenges along the way. Our economic prospectus will be clear on these too. If the past 3 weeks have taught us anything, it is that a country's fiscal and monetary policy must be sustainable and command confidence. We will not shy away from that. Our approach to borrowing with the new powers of independence will be responsible and for a purpose. Let me give one example of that. A central proposal in the paper we will publish next week. We propose to invest remaining oil revenues and use our borrowing powers, not to cut tax for the richest, but to set up an independence investment fund. The Building a New Scotland Fund will deliver up to £20 billion of investment in the first decade of independence. In practical terms, a fund like this could support a massive programme to decarbonise housing, cut fuel bills and reduce fuel poverty. It could finance the building of thousands more affordable homes, invest in local renewable energy projects, helping communities own assets and wield more influence over their use. It will help the transition to net zero, build resilient communities and kick-start the sustainable economic growth so important for our newly independent nation, combining Scotland's abundant resources with the powers of independence to benefit this and future generations. Conference, that is what independence is all about. My friends, a week ago, one of the most famous men in the history of the independence movement, Ian Hamilton, died at the ripe old age of 97. As a young man in 1950, Ian, together with Kay Matheson, Gavin Vernon and Alan Stewart, repatriated the Stone of Destiny from Westminster Abbey. Ian once called it an absolutely splendid adventure. I am sure it was that, but it was so much more besides. In 1950, and to be frank, for years afterwards, independence must have seemed like an impossible dream. All of us here today have a big job still to do to win independence. But we no longer face such impossible odds. Friends, we are the independence generation. We are the inheritors of the cause kept alive by Ian Hamilton and his generation. And I believe firmly in my head and in my heart that we will be the first in the modern world to live in an independent Scotland. Let me tell you why I say that. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a woman that summed up a question I think a lot of people have. She said that she would like Scotland to be independent. She thought it would be good. But she also worried that getting there would be hard. So her question was this: is it essential? That got me thinking. For many people, like Ian, like all of us in this hall, we just believe it is right that Scotland could and should be an independent nation. But is it essential? Conference today, probably more than at any time in my life, the answer to that question is yes. Independence is essential. It is essential to escape Westminster control and mismanagement. Essential to get the governments we vote for, to properly protect our NHS, to build a new partnership of equals with the other nations on these islands. It is essential if we want to be back in the European Union. And it is essential if we want the people who live here to determine the future of this extraordinary country, the country that always tugs at our heartstrings, the country that we all care so much about. There are two things that we, the independence generation, must never, ever lose faith in. They have sustained us in good times and bad throughout all the years and decades. First is the fundamental right of the nation of Scotland to self-determination. And the second is what history teaches us, and that is the overwhelming power of democracy to triumph. My friends, the period ahead will see some of the greatest challenges our country has faced in many years. But a great opportunity is also in sight. An opportunity to win and build the better future we know is possible. A better future as an independent nation. Welcoming, diverse, full of love and compassion. In these tough times, let us inspire with hope in our hearts. Let us lift our eyes, put our shoulders to the wheel and build a better future for this, and generations to come. Friends, with optimism, confidence and determination, we can now finish the job, and we will. Thank you.
OK, everybody, that was Nicola Sturgeon there at the SNP conference. Goodness gracious me, that speech had more endings than the final Lord of the Rings film, didn't it? I don't know about you. Yeah, we ready? We ready? Anyway, somebody who's had to sit through this alongside me and indeed everybody else is a chap from the Alba Party, Member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. It's Neil Hanvey, who joined me earlier on. Neil, I can deduce a couple of things there. You do really care about what Nicola Sturgeon had to say, and that you clearly had nothing else on for an hour there. But thank you very much for sitting there for us. Just a couple of key points, a few key points from that I'd like you to get stuck into. She said she wants to make the case about independence and make that case at a general election, as opposed to doing it essentially through some form of a legal referendum, assuming that the Supreme Court says no, you can't just hold one. She says that the UK will get on better as a series of independent nations as opposed to being a collective. The Tories have launched a full frontal attack on devolution. The UK doesn't offer economic strength. Scotland is not benefiting from the UK. It's got everything it takes to succeed as an independent country, etc., etc., etc. So that's what she said. Crucially, right at the end there, she said, essentially, she definitely wants to rejoin the European Union, get back in the single market. First and foremost, would a general election victory for the SNP be enough justification for independence?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because there's lots of different strands to it. But if you think back to when the Act of Union was initially approved, it was approved by the Scottish Members of Parliament. So after the 1705 English Aliens Act, which was effectively to strong-arm Scotland into agreeing to a Treaty of Union, people were persuaded, and the line goes, bought and sold for English gold, coined by Rabbie Burns. But the consent for the Union was provided by MPs, and therefore it's been a generally agreed principle, most notably by Margaret Thatcher and others, that if there's a majority of Scottish MPs who support independence, then that should be sufficient for the dissolution of the treaty and the withdrawal from the Westminster Parliament. So we've had that now since 2015, but and I've got a very clear view on that. I think that the Westminster SNP group are far too timid. But there's a fundamental challenge here for Nicola Sturgeon, and that is when Alex Salmond won his outright majority in 2011, and we went into that campaign ahead of 2014, the strength of the argument was built on the team, record and vision of the SNP in government. And, you know, I think when we look at the SNP's performance in government now, that's just not true.
And it's a good. That's a cracking point. That's a cracking point for us to wrap it up. I do really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much for sitting through all of that and hanging over for us. Massively appreciate it. Will not be the last time that we talk on this show. Don't worry. As our party member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, Neil Hanvey. Well, we can now get some reaction from Anas Sarwar, who is the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Anas, thank you very much. Great to have you back on the show. Sturgeon stuck it to you with both barrels. They actually put you in the same bracket as the Tories. How do you feel after that?
Actually, I feel good after it, because I think it's clear that she can no longer ignore the Labour Party. She can see, and I think you saw that from the speech today, where I think she is right is to lay out the failures the Tories have across the UK. I think where she is wrong is to try and pretend that the answer to all these problems is independence. Every time there's been any kind of problem, Nicola Sturgeon's answer has always been independence. That's not changed today. I think where she's fundamentally wrong is I don't think there is a majority for a referendum. In fact, I know there's not a majority for a referendum next year. There isn't a majority for independence, but there is a majority for change. There is a majority against the status quo. That majority is not just in Scotland, it's across the UK. And the opportunity to deliver that change is a Labour government at the next general election. That's something that Nicola Sturgeon can't run away from.
No, well, it's not just one referendum, though, is it? It's two. She wants a referendum to leave the UK, and she will want, well, presumably a referendum, or to begin the process anyway, however you want to bracket that, to rejoin the European Union as quickly as possible. So you must be on shaky ground there, presumably, because, yes, the Labour Party policy at the minute is not to back Scottish independence, fine, yes, but realistically, you'd want to rejoin the EU, wouldn't you?
Well, look, I've made it very clear that it would be, I would prefer the UK was still in the European Union. I've been very clear about that. I want us to have as close a relationship with the European Union as possible, but I would be inconsistent if I said that we should not go back to the old arguments and therefore not have a second independence referendum, but it's okay to go back to the old argument and have another Brexit referendum. I think people are tired of referendums. I think they're tired of being pitted into different tribes, and I think they instead want a politics that's about building in all of us and trying to change that relationship. And so the key difference, I think, is Nicola Sturgeon wants to pretend that there is no difference between a Labour government and a Tory government, when in actual fact, if the next general election, well, we will not have a UK government that's deliberately picking fights with the European Union in order to cover for their own failures. Instead, we'll have a Labour government that's proactively working when it's in our national interest with the European Union to create opportunities, growth and jobs here in Scotland and across the UK. That's a very, very different frame. Nicola Sturgeon wants to pit people into tribes. Liz Truss wants to pit people into tribes. I'm done with that. I want to build in all of us across the country. And that change, that majority for change, is the Labour Party.
I must say, I was blown away by Nicola Sturgeon's ability to stand there and talk about love and compassion when anyone, certainly a lot of people anyway in the media, will know that trying to deal with the SNP is not a particularly loving or compassionate state of affairs, but there we go. Why do you think that Scotland is better as part of the UK?
Well, look, I recognise that there is huge challenges in the United Kingdom right now. I recognise that we have a government that feels distant from us in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee, but actually also feels distant from people in Cardiff and Birmingham and Liverpool and London and Manchester and other parts of the United Kingdom too. I don't view this prism as a Scotland versus England fight. Nicola Sturgeon wants to view this as somehow it's Scotland versus England. It's not. The next general election is going to be the people of Britain versus the Tories, and I think the people of Britain are going to win. I think we're going to wipe the Tories out across the UK and have a UK Labour government that is working, yes, in the interest of Scotland, but is also working in the interest of the whole of the United Kingdom, recognising the change we need. And on to the central point you make, I don't think you add to the challenges we've seen from this crashing of the economy by Kwasi Kwarteng, the damage that's been done by the Conservative Party through Brexit. I don't think the answer to chaos is more chaos. That's what independence would be. That's what the SNP want to deliver. I think we need stability in the face of that chaos. I think we need unity in the face of that division. I think we need to give people hope in the face of that despair, not feed off people's despair, which is what Nicola Sturgeon is ultimately trying to do, despite all our talk of love and compassion.
Yeah, she was going on quite a lot there, as you would expect, about renewables and net zero and all of this stuff. Would an independent Scotland, is it not sitting on an absolute gold mine when it comes to oil and gas? Realistically, do you not think if people voted for independence, they would quite like to reap the rewards of that black gold coming out of the sea, as it were, as opposed to, you know, wind farms?
Look, we have got to maintain our obligations around climate change. Climate change is very real. It risks future generations. It risks the kind of planet we leave our children. We have to go to a carbon neutral future. That means a mix that, of course, is led by renewables, but I think requires probably a nuclear supply, a base ground, in order to make sure we don't have blackouts across the country. But my challenge to Nicola Sturgeon would be, you have been in government for 15 years. You promised us that Scotland would be the Saudi Arabia of renewables. You promised that in government, in this current settlement of devolution, you could create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Instead, you created less than 20,000. Stop this pretense that somehow something else is holding us back. You have the power, you have the ability, you've been in government for 15 years. Use that responsibility and give people of Scotland the democratic revolution, the energy revolution they deserve right now.
I just want to squeeze one more quickly in with you, because we are very pressed on time. You hit some cracking points there, though. You know, SNP run Scotland does, I suppose, mean that it's not got a particularly strong stance on illegal immigration. More than a quarter of children in Dumfries and Galloway are still living in poverty, apparently. Humza Yousaf has been accused of massaging NHS waiting time figures, highest drug death rate in Europe. I've got to ask, can I flip this on its head? Why should the rest of the UK want to keep Scotland?
Well, look, I don't buy into this argument. I think that that kind of language, that kind of rhetoric, I think only helps push those that want to divide us into their entrenched camps. I believe genuinely right across this country there's a majority of people in Scotland who want to work in partnership and in friendship with the rest of the UK. I believe there's a majority of the rest of the UK that want to work in partnership and friendship with the people of Scotland. So I'm not going to get into this kind of divide that wants to pit one worker against another worker in a different part of the country or try and pit Scotland against England. I don't view my politics in that frame. I believe in social solidarity. I believe in fighting poverty in Liverpool and Birmingham and Manchester just as much in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. And that's a very Labour case and one we'll be making in the next general election.
Anas, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show, and well swerved as well towards the end there. Anas Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. What do you make of that? Keep these views coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Lots to get stuck into there from Nicola Sturgeon's speech, live from the SNP party conference in Aberdeen, and the man himself was there to watch it. It's our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, where to start?
Yeah, so let's take you through a couple of the kind of key points of it, I think, in many ways, Patrick. First of all, it was very, very independence heavy. Maybe not a surprise, of course, that is the essence, isn't it, of the Scottish National Party. But ultimately, in the end, Nicola Sturgeon was trying to kind of make two key points. First of all, answering that question that you and I were talking about before the speech, the kind of frustration outside of here, where people are saying, well, Nicola Sturgeon should be focused during a cost of living crisis on things like standards in schools, on the National Health Service this winter, on trying to get energy bills down, etc., etc. And she turned that around, if you like, and said that actually the cost of living crisis meant that Scottish independence was more important, more essential in some ways, she would argue, than ever. And she was also making this point that one of the things that she would say is undermining the union is this kind of aggressive unionism that you're seeing from Boris Johnson and indeed from Liz Truss as well. And in essence making the case that actually an independent Scotland would be just as good friends, if not better, with England, Wales and the island of Ireland. But in the, it kind of summing it all up really from her point of view is that she's kind of a bit stuck in all of this because she's having to wait for this Supreme Court decision, which is going to take at least a couple of months. We know that they're going to start their hearings tomorrow. Even then, and she alludes to this, if they rule against Scotland and the SNP in the essence that it's not up to Holyrood MSPs to decide when and if there's going to be a referendum, but rather up to MPs in Westminster, what does she do then? I mean, there's this talk about this de facto referendum being the Westminster general election in 2024, but a general election is not a referendum. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. And then where does she go? And that, I think, is despite the passion in the room, despite the fact that, the polls are pretty good for Scottish independence, kind of constitutionally, they're a bit of a bind about all of this. There were some domestic announcements when it comes to winter spending and help, particularly for kids and people to get through this winter. But in the end, hammering home that point of independence is just a reminder, I think, of the frustrations on the two sides of this argument. Those that want independence are really frustrated they can't have a referendum, and those that don't want a referendum are really frustrated that the issue, frankly, is not going away.
Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor, live from the scene in Aberdeen there, where Nicola Sturgeon has just been delivering her conference speech. Lots of good stuff to get stuck into. We'll be doing this throughout the show, as well as a few other bits and bobs as well. We can't just do Scotland for the entirety, although, of course, we are the People's Channel. What do you make of that overarching point there? And I think now is a good time to raise it. Scottish independence, from what Nicola Sturgeon is saying anyway, does mean rejoining the European Union. Sick and tired of being led by Westminster. Not sick and tired whatsoever of being led by unelected officials in Brussels. Riddle me that, people. But there we go. Coming up, Liz Truss preparing to put on the charm offensive. That's a terrifying thought, isn't it? To convince wavering MPs that she's still the right person to lead the country. Reports are suggesting the Prime Minister is ready to listen to Conservative critics of her proposals to increase benefit payments by less than inflation as she battles to turn her so far short premiership around. We've got all of that coming your way, as well as the latest from what's going on in Ukraine, potentially a build-up of forces in Belarus as well, what could be kicking off there. But first, it's time for your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Well, as you've been hearing, Scotland's First Minister says she'll hold a Scottish independence referendum on the 19th of October next year if the Supreme Court approves it. Closing the SNP conference in Aberdeen a short time ago, Nicola Sturgeon said leaving the UK would lead to better relationships with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ms Sturgeon also said an independent Scotland would rejoin the European Union. The Supreme Court will be hearing legal arguments this week before deciding if Holyrood has the required powers to legislate for a second vote.
The Supreme Court will consider whether the current law allows the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an advisory referendum. If Westminster had any respect at all for Scottish democracy, this court hearing would not be necessary. If the court decides in the way we hope it does, on 19th October next year, there will be an independence referendum.
Well, also in the headlines today, G7 leaders will hold urgent talks tomorrow to discuss their response to the latest round of Russian airstrikes on Ukraine. Officials say at least 11 people have been killed and 64 others injured as explosions hit several cities, including the capital, Kyiv. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says firing missiles in civilian areas is unacceptable and the UK is watching events closely. Ukraine's President Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv in 8 regions have been damaged. The Chancellor has bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original mid-November date. But today, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, he said he'll now be published on October the 31st. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has welcomed the move. And criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action will end at 6 o'clock tonight. The chair of the Criminal Bar Association, Kirsty Brimelow, told GB News there's still a lot of anger, though, amongst members. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Don't go anywhere. Patrick's back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well done, everyone who managed to cling on after Nicola Sturgeon spoke at us for an hour. But lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on that Sturgeon speech to the SNP conference. Mel says, I can't help thinking when watching Sturgeon that she's shouting at her reflection in the mirror. As a half Scot, I know my family up in Scotland do not want independence from the rest of the UK. She then puts it in capitals, so you know she really means it. Strength in unity, weakness in division, Bob says. I'm all for Scotland staying in the UK if we're all pulling together to make Britain great. But if they're not going to pull their weight and keep on whining, it's probably better if they slung their hook. Strong stuff, Bob. Alison says, joining the EU, which is essentially what Sturgeon wants to do, doesn't give you more freedom for Scotland, it gives you even less. We've got time for one more from Susan. I do wish Westminster would tell Sturgeon that she can have her independence, call her bluff. I don't think she wants independence. She just uses it to keep the extreme nationalist dangling while she's continuously sitting on first class on the gravy train. There you go. Well, it seems to be a bit of a one-way street in our GB News inbox there when it comes to Scottish independence. But we're going to move away from Scotland now. Prime Minister Liz Truss has strongly condemned the continued Russian bombardment of civilian areas in Ukraine. Obviously, Putin now reacting to what went on that Crimean bridge. The missile strikes targeted major cities, including the capital, Kyiv. At least 11 people have been killed. We would expect that number to rise, of course, and more than 60 have been injured. It comes after the only bridge that connects Russia to Crimea partially blew up on Saturday morning. However, Ukraine has not officially admitted any responsibility for the explosion. Putin himself said it was an act of terrorism. Today, Liz Truss met the Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky ahead of tomorrow's crisis talks with fellow G7 world leaders about this ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, though, President Putin has promised a harsh response to any other attacks on what he calls Russian territory. Let's take a look at where some of these explosions have now actually hit Ukraine. So as you can see on your screens there, if you're listening on radio, I'll talk you through it. Some of them have hit basically places including Ternopil and Lviv in the west of Ukraine, Dnipro, which is in the south of Ukraine. And there have also been missile strikes, of course, as we've reported, in the capital, Kyiv. Well, joining me now is Hanna Lyubakova, who is a journalist from Minsk. And I think it's really interesting to our viewers and listeners as well as to why exactly we're going to Minsk. And that appears to be because actually there's some sort of coalition, an increased coalition between Russia and Belarus, which I think has got a lot of people very, very concerned. Would you mind running us through what the latest there is, please?
Of course. I think it's really hard to say whether this coalition can be even stronger because, well, these two gentleman has been launching the attack on Ukraine basically since February. Alexander Lukashenko, who claims to be the leader of Belarus, he offered Belarus the territory of our country as a launching pad for the aggression. What happened today is that he actually announced that there would be deployed a special military joint Belarusian-Russian group on the territory of Belarus that is going to be located near the border with Ukraine. And many immediately claimed that this might be escalation, and I do agree that this is escalation. It's not clear whether these troops would cross the border with Ukraine and whether Belarusians would be deployed, whether soldiers would be in Ukraine fighting against Ukrainians. But what is clear here is that Lukashenko is trying to divert attention of the Ukrainian army from the counteroffensive. They want the Ukrainian army perhaps to go to the north and try to defend themselves from this potential provocation from the territory of Belarus. So this is perhaps the meaning of this today's announcement.
Yeah, it is a key strategic manoeuvre, clearly, to try to divert some of the attention away from maybe some of the biggest build-ups of Russian troops, divert it towards Belarus, and then hopefully the Russians clearly can get straight through in that route there. But does this not open Belarus up now to be a potential legitimate target for Ukrainian defences and missiles?
Exactly. So today, basically, there have been a lot of talks about this potential attack from the territory of Belarus, which actually makes Belarus a target for retaliation. That's clear. Lukashenko is saying that this is because Belarus feels a threat from Kiev, from Ukraine. But it's clear that there is no threat from Kiev. So he's just kind of using this rhetoric to escalate. There was even this address today that if Poland and Lithuania behaves in the correct way, there will be no war against them. So this is very controversial. This is very ambiguous. This is the Minister of Defense, Viktor Khranin, who said that. So clearly, this is all escalation, right? And incidentally, it happens right after the attack on the bridge, on the Crimean bridge in Ukraine. So this is So this is kind of all of this shows that they're trying to divert attention and they're trying to sort of provoke, right, and to make it more, I think, costly for the Ukrainian army.
On that note, Hannah, this is one of the things that I've been wondering, and I think maybe a lot of people have as well, which is that have the Ukrainian military or their leaders maybe fallen into a little bit of a Russian trap here? As we know, Russia held those, let's be honest, bogus referendums in various different sites across the country, claimed that they were therefore then Russian. On top of that, then, Ukraine has decided to, well, as we understand it anyway, Ukrainian military has probably been responsible for an attack on that bridge in Crimea. The response now from Vladimir Putin has been to launch various different attacks on, well, largely civilian areas. Do you think that the Ukrainians fell into that trap now? They've kind of awoken the Russian bear yet again. I don't want to say they brought it on themselves, of course, but is this what Putin wanted them to do?
Well, but I would say, well, the war has been happening, the fully fledged war has been happening since February, right? So these are not Ukrainian troops that provoke the Russian army or the Kremlin, right? So the Kremlin attacked first. That was absolutely unprovoked, ungrounded attack, and Ukrainians are responding, they're fighting back. I'm not saying about Crimea, I'm saying in general, right? So that's their legitimate right. And I would say that the recent escalation here also with the participation of Lukashenko, right, only shows that Lukashenko is trying to justify the presence of Russian troops on the territory of Belarus, despite Belarusians are against that. So he has to justify himself as well, right? And we can actually expect more attacks from the territory of Belarus, unfortunately. Russians might attack again.
A concerning development there. If you are just joining us, that is the news that potentially we can expect more attacks from the territory of Belarus into Ukraine. A worrying escalation. Hannah, thank you very much. Hannah Eliabakova there, who is a journalist from Minsk, live from Minsk. We're going to go to Kiev a bit later on in the show so we can give you that side of things, as well as, it would appear anyway, Russian missiles have rained down on Ukraine's capital city today, and indeed other cities as well. But a little bit closer to home now, because there are reports that Prime Minister Liz Truss is poised for yet another U-turn on a mini-budget announcement as pressure mounts from the Cabinet to increase benefits in line with inflation. This follows a previous U-turn to scrap the top rate of tax after criticism that new measures will benefit the wealthy and increase public borrowing. In fact, something that Nicola Sturgeon went after in quite a big way from that SNP speech that we gave you earlier on. Well, let's hear now from GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Thank you very much, Catherine. Is this another U-turn, potentially?
Yes and no. I mean, no in the sense that it was never officially announced that they were going to uprate benefits in terms with earnings rather than inflation. Because, as Chloe Smith, Minister of State for Work and Pensions, said last week, there's a process that has to be followed. They haven't got all the data, etc., etc., etc. So technically, no, but yes, really, because it's been widely reported that Liz Truss wanted to raise them by the lower amount to save $5 or $6 billion, because, of course, they're desperately looking for ways to save money to fund these tax cuts. So officially, no, but yes, and really, again, because they don't have the numbers, it's become clear. As soon as she backtracked on the 45p tax rise, the rebels started thinking, what else do we not like? So immediately they went on to benefits, and we've had a week of sustained pressure on this.
Well, this is one of the things we're going to be discussing a little bit later on about leadership in general. So we're going to take a kind of bigger picture view on this, really, and whether or not her leadership has been compromised. Did she show a bit of weakness? Is she going to drum up support? How does that really work? Because some people would say the flip side of that is if she's listening to what her cabinet are saying, and they're saying, look, you've misread the room and we're going to lose in a big way at the next general election if you don't change this, then I suppose it's a good thing, isn't it, that she's changing potentially?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, I suspect she would recognise that it would have been better to take soundings about some of these policies in the mini-budget before they were announced. But yes, clearly,
better to listen, and she is on a charm offensive this week now. They're making it very clear that she wants to talk to MPs, that she's listening, so she's going to be having gatherings with up to 30 Conservative MPs at a time over the next few weeks. She's going to be in the tea room. She's talking to the 1922 Backbench Committee on Wednesday. So she's certainly in listening mode, and she's making it clear that she wants to bring them along with her. But of course, she doesn't really have much choice, because it has become very clear most of the Conservative MPs didn't want her to be Prime Minister in the first place. She had support of less than a third of them, and I think only 50 of them voted for her originally. So she has no choice. If she can't bring them with her, she simply can't get these policies through.
And that's the concern that she's going to have, frankly, until, or if, she wins a general election. A lack of public mandate, therefore a lack of a reason, potentially, for a lot of her own MPs to get behind her. Boris did have that whopping majority, didn't he? So even when things were starting to turn against him, he could point to that and go, well, look, the people want me. So people could fall in line behind him. She doesn't have that at the minute.
Exactly, because the mandate she had was from 80,000 Conservative members, which is very, very small. And she beat Rishi Sunak, but only about sort of 58 to 43. So it wasn't huge. And like the Greenpeace protesters at the conference saying, who voted for this? Well, who did vote for it? Because there hasn't been a general election. And weirdly, they were sort of in line with Nadine Dorries, who now, having been such a supporter, is saying, you know, there's no mandate for this. People voted for Boris Johnson. People voted for the 2019 manifesto pledges. Most of these things were not in it. So you need to be careful. So it'll be interesting to see.
I can see, because you always come stacked full of epic notes whenever I ask you any questions. So, are there any little bits and bobs that I haven't asked you about here that you think need to be brought to the public's attention?
Well, Grant Shapps is still on manoeuvres. He's got a £1,600 folding Galaxy phone, which enables him to see his spreadsheet. He's been talking to 237 MPs. He's got 6,000 data points from previous conversations with MPs, all about views of MPs regarding Truss and her plans. So, mess with Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, at your peril.
Fantastic stuff. Well, there you go. That was interesting. That sounds very complex, I must say. That's a man possessed now, isn't it? Catherine, thank you so much. Catherine Forster, our political reporter. But are U-turns, whether you want to call it a U-turn, probably is a U-turn, really, being urged as well to listen to others, is that a sign of weakness in leadership or good listening? Joining me now is Avril Lehman, who is a leadership psychologist and author at the leadership consultancy The Whitewater Group, and Sunil Sharma, who is the chair of the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth. Great stuff, both of you. Right, well, look, I think I'm going to take a slightly bigger picture view, Avril, with you first, and ask, is Liz Truss trying now to drum up support from the likes of the 1922 committee and going on a charm offensive? Is that an admittance of weakness or just good leadership?
I might have a particular view about Liz Truss. If we're talking about leadership in general, being consultative, listening, but being decisive, those are good marks of leadership. Old-fashioned leadership is likely to be autocratic, all-knowing, and not listen to anybody else. That's not modern leadership. However, you do have to have that deciding factor so that you know what you're doing, but you're aware of all the consequences and all the other opinions. Few of us are very good at listening. We do tend to only listen to people who are in our own echo chamber, so we never get a view different from our own.
So what you're saying there, Avril, and we'll return to this, is that my own personal style of leadership, which is brutal, tyrannical, shouting, that's not modern enough. Well, we'll have to revisit that in my next meeting.
Well, it's not effective. Let's just say it works while you're in the room shouting.
The jury's out on that. I'm still here. OK, that's all I'll say. Sunil, thank you very much. Sunil, I'll come back. I'll come over to you now. Look, is this good leadership from Liz Truss? She's going on this charm offensive, do you think? Do you think people need to fall into line? Because potentially some of these Tories need whipping into shape.
I think so. I think some of the MPs, they need to understand how democracy actually works. You elect a leader, you let them govern, you let them make decisions that sometimes even us as a people, other politicians are not happy with, and you make decisions that are better in the long term, not just focus on the short term. We just removed a leader with, who had the highest majority in over 30 years over a birthday cake. We now have a new one. I think it's a time for a lot of these MPs and some of the sort of elites involved to almost put up and shut up. And you know what? If you don't like her policies in 2 years, you can vote her out. That's how democracy works. Instead, I think we're seeing a lot of people throwing their toys out the pram, murmuring on social media, journalists sort of bombarding all of their thoughts. I kind of want our leader to ignore the noise around her and actually lead. And I think some of these MPs need to start to think maybe these policies may not be so great to their electorate right now, but the whole point is you have an election in 2 years' time, and they need to be more concerned about that as opposed to today.
Yeah, and Avril, I'll throw it back to you, because my concern for Truss would be that if she shows that if you lobby her hard enough, she'll just change her mind and do whatever you want, then why wouldn't you keep doing that? This is the cabinet who would be in control and not our actual Prime Minister.
Yeah. And that's where I say you need to have a strong character and be decisive, but still listen. The question was about whether listening was good in leadership, and it certainly is. But you've got to then have that strong leadership that shows that you do know what you're doing, if you do know what you're doing.
I suppose then, Sunil, that's the question, isn't it? It's all very well and good being decisive, but you have to make the right decisions. And has Liz Truss made the right decisions so far?
I think she has. I think on the tax cuts, it made sense in terms of she's looking to centre around sort of wealth creation as opposed to wealth redistribution. I think she could definitely do a better job in terms of PR and maybe marketing towards people, maybe some of the MPs there. But in essence, it makes sense that some of the benefit stuff that we're looking at, I mean, last year we saw benefit fraud double. It was 8.6 billion. Maybe some of that stuff she could be talking about a bit more as opposed to just, maybe I don't know what her approach has been with the MPs, but certainly to the public, maybe a bit more explanation would be better.
Avril, if you're just not a good orator, there you go, Freudian slip. If you're not a good orator and you're not particularly charismatic behind the scenes, realistically, that's not great for leadership, is it?
No, but charisma is really interesting, because when people ask us, can you teach leadership? We will always say yes, but people will often say yes, but you can't teach charisma. And we researched charisma, and what people came up with when they were describing charismatic leaders, they always said, this person listened to me. They hung on my every word. I've heard people say that of Margaret Thatcher, for instance. Somebody who would never have voted for her knew that in the instant that she was with him, she only listened to him. And she derived a great deal of information by listening deeply to people. So charisma can be taught, as can good public speaking and good use of hand gestures and things, which, interestingly, lots of politicians don't seem to ever pay attention to.
No, I often get told off for using them too much, but there we go. Look, thank you very much. I've got to leave it there, both of you, I'm afraid. But that was Avril Lehman, who is a leadership psychologist and author at the leadership consultancy, the White Water Group, and Sunil Sharma, who is the chair of the Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth, just to ask whether or not Truss is showing good leadership. If you're just joining us, it's because she's now on, quotes unquote, a charm offensive behind the scenes to try to drum up a little bit more support from her Conservative colleagues. But coming up right here on GB News Live, with me, Patrick Christys, as we hurtle ourselves into the final hour of this show, they're at it again. Just Stop Oil. They just won't stop, will they? This morning, the eco-warriors blocked the mall outside Buckingham Palace, gluing their hands together in protest against new fossil fuel licences. I've got Just Stop Oil coming right here into the studio. We've tried to make sure that all our surfaces here are non-stick, but yes, we'll do our best. Anyway, stay with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News Live. Before that, it's your weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a fine afternoon for many places. Sunny spells across a large part of the UK, but some showers have continued, especially towards the northwest of Scotland. That's because we've still got this area of low pressure to the north, and that's driving some unsettled weather into the north and west of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, northwest England as well. But elsewhere, a ridge of high pressure means that it's been a clear afternoon, and we keep the clear skies across England and Wales overnight with light winds as well. With those clear skies and with light winds, one or two mist and fog patches couldn't be ruled out. And actually temperatures will fall away. It's looking like a chilly night in places, especially through central parts of England and Wales. In some shelter spots, 1 or 0 Celsius possible first thing. Not so cold for northern and western Scotland. Here, thicker cloud and 7 or 8 Celsius more likely, with showers continuing overnight and into the start of Tuesday. Now, the showers in western Scotland will be replaced by more prolonged spells of rain into Tuesday afternoon, and that rain just brushing the far north of Northern Ireland. A few more showers to come for southern Scotland and northern England, but otherwise for the southern half of the UK, sunny spells once again, and with light winds, 16 Celsius in the south will feel quite pleasant, 13 or 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, as we end Tuesday, we'll see more prolonged and some heavier bursts of rain coming along into Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, as well as Northern England and North Wales. The rain on and off, I think, in many places. It's going to be most persistent towards the far northwest. And to the southeast, well, here we keep the clear spells, and it'll be another chilly night with temperatures mid to low single figures in places. A bright start to the day for the Midlands, East Anglia, the southeast. I think we keep the bright skies here for much of Wednesday, but elsewhere we'll see this band of rain toppling south into northern England, eventually North Midlands and North Wales. It will eventually peter out, but more unsettled weather on the way for Thursday and Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up at 5 o'clock, an independent Scotland, a pledge and commitment the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon will not drop during a keynote speech at the SNP conference earlier, which I'm sure you were all gripped by. She said Scotland can make independence a success. Said that never let anyone tell us otherwise, but would it really matter if she broke up the union and Scotland voted for independence? I'm going to discuss this with passionate voices on both sides of the argument. In fact, would it make things a lot easier if the rest of the UK cut Scotland adrift? Liz Truss has condemned the continued Russian missile attacks on civilian areas in Ukraine as appalling. Her Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, also condemned the strikes by describing them as, quote, war crimes. It comes after Kyiv was targeted for the first time in months, as the capital city was hit by missiles, killing at least 10 people and injuring at least 60. We'll cross live to Kyiv very, very shortly. And they're at it again. Just stop oil. They just won't stop. This morning, eco-warriors blocked the mall outside Buckingham Palace. A couple of weeks too late there to cause maximum destruction, you would have thought, but there we go. Gluing their hands together in protest against new fossil fuel licences. I will ask their spokesperson whether their actions are really going to make a difference, whether or not they think they're bringing the public with them, whether or not they should just get a job. But before that, it's the latest news.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, as you've been hearing, Scotland's First Minister says she'll hold an independence referendum on the 19th of October next year if the UK Supreme Court approves it. Closing the SNP conference in Aberdeen a short time ago, Nicola Sturgeon said leaving the UK would lead to a better relationship with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ms Sturgeon also said Scotland would rejoin the European Union. The Supreme Court will rule next week if Holyrood has the required powers to hold another vote.
The Supreme Court will consider whether the current law allows the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an advisory referendum. If Westminster had any respect at all for Scottish democracy, this court hearing would not be necessary. If the court decides in the way we hope it does, on 19th October next year, there will be an independence referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon. Well, G7 leaders will hold urgent talks tomorrow to discuss their response to the latest round of Russian airstrikes over Ukraine. Officials are saying at least 11 people have been killed and 64 others injured as explosions hit several cities, including the capital, Kyiv. Here, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, says firing missiles in civilian areas is unacceptable and the UK is watching events very closely. Ukraine's President Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv and 8 regions have been damaged.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people, such as time. Such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. We restore everything that is destroyed.
Well, for his part, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he thinks it was right to retaliate after an explosion badly damaged a Russian bridge and military supply line to the illegally occupied Crimea at the weekend. Putin accused Ukraine of a terrorist attack on the bridge, warning that if attacks continued against Russia, there would be more retaliatory strikes on Ukraine.
If attempts to carry out acts of terrorism on our territory continue, Russia's response will be harsh, and its scale will correspond to that of the threat made against the Russian Federation. No one should be in any doubt about that.
Well, the European Union has condemned Russia's actions, with the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen saying the UK will continue to support Ukraine.
I am shocked and appalled by the vicious attack on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. Russia once again has shown to the world what it stands for. It is terror and brutality. Those who are responsible have to be held accountable.
Well, here the Chancellor has bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GBNews, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original date in mid-November. But today, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, he said it'll now be published at the end of October. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has welcomed the move.
I'm pleased that they've brought forward this date to begin the process. But what I want to see, and what I would do now, is reverse that kamikaze mini budget. That's got to be reversed. We need to have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies to pay or help to pay for the energy price freeze. And what that will do, and most important of all, is to stabilise the economy, because this chaotic, irresponsible approach is all of the government's own making.
In international news, the UK has imposed sanctions on Iran's so-called morality police following human rights violations. The sanctions mean that members of the police force, along with 5 leading political and security officials, will be unable to travel to the UK, and any assets held in this country will be frozen. It follows protests in Iran sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody. The 22-year-old had been detained for allegedly not adhering to Iran's strict dress code for women. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action will finish at 6 o'clock tonight, just under an hour. You with GB News? More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Patrick. Yeah.
Right, well, the SNP leader and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has told delegates at a party conference speech earlier today that Scotland can make independence a success and to never let anyone tell us otherwise. She also said that she believes that for Scotland, the problem is not just which party is in power at Westminster. The problem is just Westminster. Let's have a quick listen to, I was going to say some of Sturgeon's greatest hits, but as someone who sat through the entire hour of it, I think it's more likely to say lowlights. Anyway, take it away.
This beautiful, magnificent country of ours is bursting with talent, creativity and ingenuity. We also have a sense of solidarity and common purpose that, yes, our political debate can sometimes obscure. Conference, Scotland has got what it takes to be a successful, independent country. It has it in abundance. Never let anyone tell us otherwise.
Yes, rather a lot else to get stuck into from that Sturgeon speech as well, but that's what happens, I suppose, when somebody talks at you for an hour. Let's hear from my large panel this evening. I've got James Bundy, the Conservative councillor in Falkirk. He's against Scottish independence. The former editor of the Sun newspaper, Calvin Mackenzie, also joins me with his strong views on Sturgeon and her independence campaign. Also here this evening, Peter Young, who's a Scot living in England against independence, and Austin Sheridan, a former SNP Glasgow City councillor who is pro-independence. I must say, it's nice to have someone who's got some kind of connection to the SNP actually appear on the media down here, but there we go. Calvin Mackenzie, I will start with you, former editor of The Sun. Should we just nip this in the bud, do you think, and the UK divorce itself from Scotland as opposed to the other way around?
Yeah, no, I agree with, look, I'm in favour of their self-determination. After all, we had a Brexit vote, and so we as a country, the UK, was in favour of self-determination, so why shouldn't the Scots have it? And there would be one other major reason. I would actually like to get them off the payroll. And I'd also actually, in a rather, this is a rather humorous point, I'm rather not interested in their football results either. So I could listen to more of my local ones. But the important point was that as the way that the Barnett formula was put together, and you'll remember, actually, you won't remember, Patrick, but I don't know, I think it must have been in the early 70s. I think Joel Barnett, who was like Chief Secretary of the Treasury, was actually ordered, come up with a good idea to give the old jocks some more money. And they came up with this formula so that so government spending per head in Scotland is like north of 2,000 quid. And even the poor people of Wales, I think, only get about 1,500 quid. So the Scots do very well out of the rich southeast of England because they're the only people that actually generate any wealth for the rest of the nation. So for two reasons, I'd like to see them go. Reason number one, I believe in self-determination, and if there is a vote and they want to go, God bless you. And I feel about that about Wales and Northern Ireland. And also, secondly, because I'd actually like to have more of my own money in my pocket rather than going into the pockets of the Scots.
All right, I'll throw it over to SNP, former SNP member for Glasgow City as well, who is joining me there. Austin Sheridan, there we are. Thank you very much. Austin, what is independent about leaving the UK and rejoining the EU?
Because the EU is a collective of independent countries. It doesn't operate in the same way that United Kingdom does. What you'll find is that in the EU is that there is a level playing field. I mean, if you look back to, say, the Lisbon Treaty, for example, one country, Ireland, blocked it, and then it did have to get amended and then revisited in order for that to be implemented. Whereas the nature of the Union of the United Kingdom, that is not how we work.
Austin, you get to elect... Yeah, but you get to elect people here, whereas if you rejoin the EU, you are led by an unelected cabal, aren't you, Austin?
Well, if we rejoined the EU, we would get to elect members of the European Parliament that can contribute. But the nature of the European Union and the way that union works is completely different to the nature of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is not a family of nations or a family of equals. it is dominated by the southeast of England that elect the majority of Westminster MPs. Now, if we choose to remain part of that system, then we have to accept that. But I'm suggesting that we shouldn't remain part of that system.
OK, I can see a lot of head shaking going on everywhere, actually. It's a proper row, this. We love to see it. James Bundy, the Conservative councillor in Falkirk, your views on what Nicola Sturgeon had to say, because she says that the Tories have launched a full frontal attack on devolution.
It was utterly predictable what Nicola Sturgeon would be saying today. Her drivel during conference was dangerous and divisive. She says she detests the Tories when she accused Labour of chucking Scotland under the bus. No leader should be using that language, particularly when Scotland is in such a divisive state. The abuse that we get in politics today is at a level that's unacceptable, and when Nicola Sturgeon uses words like that, it just stokes the tension up even more. On the point of Scotland in the Union, I believe Scotland empowers the Union. I believe the Union empowers Scotland. I think it's a two-way relationship. The comments from the two previous guests actually contradicted each other. One said that the Union benefits Scotland at the expense of the southeast of England. The other says the southeast benefits at the expense of Scotland. Those two arguments cannot stand up with each other. The Union benefits Scotland greatly. Economic stability, shared currency, armed forces, membership of G7, G20, NATO, UN Security Council. Separating Scotland from the UK.
You've raised some really good. You've raised some
organisations.
Yeah, some really good points there, and some, as far as I can tell, relative unknowns. Peter Young, I'll bring you in now, who is a Scot living in England. So thank you very much for joining us. If Scotland did vote for independence, are there not some unanswered questions in terms of what currency the Scots might use, how indeed it might defend itself, for example? Peter, your views?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nicola Sturgeon is really desperate for the Supreme Court not to allow this referendum, because I think she knows perfectly well there'll be a complete economic collapse. And I'm sorry, Kelvin, we'd have to come in the UK and bail them out again. I mean, what would happen is that because there's a huge budget deficit of 24 billion now covered by the UK government, they'd have to borrow money to cover that deficit. They'd have to pay hugely high interest rates because they have no borrowing track record. And also, people would know that they would have to devalue the currency at some point. They want to go with sterling, but they can't do that. They can't do that for very long. So no one would actually lend them any money. And if anyone who daft enough to do so would do it at hugely high interest rates. The result would be taxes would go shoot right up. Public spending would have to be slashed. There would be huge capital, and so wages would be affected. People would have their mortgages in a foreign currency, and the mortgage would go up by 20-30%, the amount of the depreciation. There would be huge capital flight, and this so-called talent, creativity, ingenuity, which does indeed exist in Scotland, would be hot-footing it across the border to out of Scotland. There would be a total collapse, and we'd have to bail them out.
Well, I just want to bring our friend Austin Sheridan back in on that, who's a former SNP Glasgow City Councillor, before I go, actually, the way this panel is laid out, ironically, further up north to Kelvin Mackenzie. But I'll start with you on this one, Austin. You'd be skint and everyone would leave.
Absolutely not, and we're looking forward to the papers that are going to be published very, very shortly to outline in more detail what the economic case for independence is going to be. But just to answer the currency question straight up, is that the plan is to move to a Scottish pound and move away from sterling. Now, obviously, in the event of Scotland voting for independence, there would be a transition period, but we would aim for that to be as short as possible, and we would establish a central
what if we drag it
in
out?
Scotland as the lender of last resort. But if we're talking about what's divisive, right?
What if we made that as difficult as possible for you, Austin, though, to be fair? What if we just made that as difficult for you as possible? A little bit like that group of people that Nicola Sturgeon wants to rejoin now in Brussels. We made that as nightmarish as physically possible for you, undercut you at every possible opportunity, and dragged it out long enough, so long, deliberately so, that maybe people decided that they actually wanted to rejoin.
Well, I very much doubt that would be the case, because that would be self-inflicting damage to the rest of the United Kingdom, so there would be no benefit whatsoever in that happening. But if we were talking about, I mean, if we can just address what the Tory councillor was saying about Nicola Sturgeon being divisive and talking about detesting the Tories, I mean, I would say that the Conservatives have been the most divisive political party the United Kingdom has seen in a very long time. You know, partying while people are dying. We've got a Home Secretary that says that her dream is to send immigrants to Rwanda. I mean, that kind of behaviour is disgusting. So while I will not be taking lectures from any Tory about what a leader should and shouldn't be saying, when they've got leading politicians coming out with such ridiculous statements, inhumane statements, this is why we need independence. We can't afford to pay the price of this government.
OK, all right, Kelvin, I'll throw it back to you, because a couple of other things, as far as I can tell, Scottish independence would mean that Nicola Sturgeon remarkably didn't seem to mention in her SNP speech there is men in female prisons and children being able to reassign their gender at schools without having to consult their parents, a highest drug death rate in Europe, more than a quarter of children in Dumfries and Galloway living in poverty, and Humza Yousaf being accused of massaging NHS waiting times. Do you think an independent Scotland would be a nice place to live, Kelvin?
I think she's in a degree of difficulty herself. I mean, the truth about the matter is, when King Charles was in, I think, Dunfermline last week, he got a big cheer, and there were as many boos as there were cheers for Sturgeon, which is a remarkable turnaround from where it would have been a year, 18 months ago. So clearly the atmosphere in Scotland, and actually Labour, as our Scottish friend will affirm, are actually, strangely, doing rather well. I mean, the truth about the matter, they're like 30% at the moment, which is an unheard of figure this last 10 or 50 years. The truth about the matter is, as far as the English are concerned, Scotland has always been a foreign country. It's either been run by a cabal, a total majority of Labour MPs, or currently now virtually a total majority of SNP. And we don't have anything to do with that. We're down here in the south making money, trying to get on with our lives, sending money up by train up to Glasgow every so often to bail out the tenements. Honestly, thank you very much. It's been a very enjoyable 300 or 400 years. It's time to say farewell. Stand on your own feet and let's find out whether you're right or wrong about whether you can survive.
James Bundy, the Conservative councillor at Falkirk, I will give the final say over to you on this. One thing I will say that I thought that Nicola Sturgeon has got a case for is that the Tories have not really done themselves any favours when it comes to promoting the economic strength of a union at the minute. We have got a cost of living crisis.
Well, the Conservative government have made an unprecedented intervention when it comes to energy prices, the energy cap, and this will help individuals, families and businesses across the UK when countries around the world, particularly in Europe, are seeing energy prices rise. So this is a sign of the economic strength of the United Kingdom. And Nicola Sturgeon wants to rip that strength up. She wants to create a gigantic deficit, as one of the panelists said. She wants to raise taxes, cut spending. That's the only way she can finance this fantasy of hers. Scotland empowers the union. I completely disagree with Kelvin. Scotland is not a foreign country. We are one United Kingdom. It's worked successfully for 300 years. Long may it continue.
I found the way that we've managed to stoke more division now amongst several different people than I think any referendum would ever done. But Peter, I've realised, sorry, I misspoke earlier. I'll give the final say to you because I've only given you one answer so far. Who do you agree with more? Is it Kelvin McKenzie that people down south are lobbing a load of money back up north, or the people up north are helping to pay their way as well? I mean, you've made the move down south. Presumably you're quite happy here and you're here for a reason.
Well, we had, Kelvin was wrong in his first comment. We had a so-called once-in-a-lifetime referendum to discuss this and decide this in 2014, and a clear majority decided against independence. Around 2/3 of Scottish voters, according to opinion polls, they're against having another referendum now. It's just talked about by Nicola Sturgeon as a distraction from the a very poor performance of her government. I mean, the one thing that has been a great success in Scotland under Sturgeon, it must be said, is the anti-growth coalition that she leads. Economic growth in Scotland has been half the level of the rest of the UK. That means greater poverty, greater unemployment, fewer businesses, 4 billion fewer tax receipts, 11 billion less economic activity per year. It's just been a disgrace. So they need to have something to talk about, particularly to wind up their own supporters. But it's a fantasy. It's not going to happen. Sorry about that, Kelvin. The UK is stronger together, much stronger together.
That's Sturgeon on the phone.
Sure
she's angry.
I think someone is ringing to complain already, yeah.
Yeah.
We're much better off together. It's a much stronger country. It would be very foolish from a defence perspective to split it apart, and it's just a lot of nonsense being spouted by Sturgeon to distract attention.
All right, look, all of you, thank you very, very much. I really just wish we could have done an entire show like this, actually, to be honest with you, but I think I've got to go over and talk about mortgages or something now. But all of you, thank you so much. Great to have you on the show. We've got James Bundy, Conservative councillor at Falkirk. He's obviously been up alongside former editor of The Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie, and as well as Peter Young, who's a Scot living in England, and Austin Sheridan as well, former SNP, Glasgow City councillor. Austin, thank you very much, especially, actually, I must say, because it's easy to get outnumbered, especially here, and so we do appreciate you fighting the good fight. Thank you very, very much. Right, OK. Ooh. Hardly any time to come up for air after this one. This is GBNews Live with me, Patrick Christys, and coming up, Liz Truss has condemned the Russian missile strikes on civilian areas in Ukraine. She said they are appalling. We'll be crossing live to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, where, not so long ago anyway, air raid sirens were still ringing out. We're back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
OK, welcome back, everybody. We're going live now to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, where the bombs apparently have been raining down pretty much all day, along with other major Ukrainian cities. Vladimir Putin has decided to hit back after a series of military setbacks, most notably recently as well, the bridge in Crimea. Explosions throughout the day have killed at least 11 people, injured another 64. Even reports of a children's play area being struck. Air raid sirens have been going off in the capital, Kyiv, relentlessly. Meanwhile, China is calling for a de-escalation. The attacks have come after the only bridge that connects Russia to Crimea partially exploded on Saturday morning. However, Ukraine has so far not actually admitted responsibility for that explosion. And that's quite an interesting discussion as well. Liz Truss has spoken to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ahead of tomorrow's crisis talks with fellow G7 leaders. Putin, however, has promised a harsh response to any other attacks on what he regards, anyway, as Russian territory. Joining me right now is Stefan Wiechert, who is a journalist that's actually in Kyiv. So we're going live, essentially, to the epicentre of the latest outbreak of violence. He's been in Ukraine since the war broke out. Just give us the latest lay of the land, then. Have air raid sirens still been going off? Are bombs still coming down? What's actually been happening in the last, I don't know, couple of hours, really?
It's been quiet since midday, more or less. I mean, there has been air raids since then, but we haven't had any missile attacks on the capital since this morning. I mean, the missiles were striking on local time between 8 to 10, and then it kind of stopped. But of course, the work of recovering potential bodies who could be in some of the buildings that's been hit is still ongoing at this moment.
Stefan, this has been done in response, pretty much anyway, to what happened on that bridge that connects Crimea to Russia. Ukraine has not actually officially claimed responsibility for blowing that bridge up. Is there a chance that Putin might have done that himself, do you think? What's the mood music on the ground?
Well, that is, of course, a possibility. That is a possibility. There's also a possibility that it is the Ukrainians, in fact, and they're just not taking responsibility for it. That is definitely also a possibility. But there is also another one. I mean, there is also partisan activity committed by Russians inside Russia, and they have also at least claimed to stand behind some of the sabotage that we have seen in Russian territory since February. So it's also possible that it could be one of those groups. I think that's the three scenarios that's here.
OK, all right. And is a concern now, then, that if the Ukrainians go on the offensive even more, that this is what's going to happen? Putin is just going to reduce Kyiv to rubble?
Yeah, that's the fear. I mean, when I talk to people on the street today, I mean, they're shocked about this. Kyiv used to be more safe the last 3 months. I mean, not really used to having missile strikes on the center of the city, playgrounds. Like, people are just on the way to work when the missiles hit. But yes, the worry is that if Ukraine continues to push, which they will, and which is at least what the military say they will continue to fight, that Putin will keep doing this, and maybe even on a larger scale that we're seeing now. And the big question for people here in Ukraine and in the capital here is that could Putin potentially use nuclear weapons? That's the big fear.
It's a massive fear. And look, this bridge, whether or not it was Ukrainian special forces, whoever did it, has been the catalyst for what we've seen since, which has been Putin raining down bombs on numerous different Ukrainian cities, including the capital. And it would appear as well, even accentuating his coalition, as it were, with Belarus to potentially open up multiple fronts into Ukraine, stretching the Ukrainian resources to the max. If this continues and that threat of nuclear weapons raises as well, will the people of Ukraine tell Volodymyr Zelensky, look, cut a deal with Putin, we've had enough of this?
I would say no. Like, all abroad, I mean, I cannot say what will happen, of course, if a nuclear attack happens. That might change things, we don't know. But right now, the vast majority of Ukrainians want to continue the fight because their kind of thinking is that if we stop fighting and we give in to Russia, maybe make a temporary ceasefire, it's only going to be a matter of time before Russia attacks again. And that means there's not really a possibility of any peace anyway. But there are some people who are saying, well, we need to negotiate at some point because people have not really a lot of things. Like they maybe lost their home. A lot of people are really scared. They have lost their job, and the winter is coming. It's not all parts of Ukraine which will have heating in winter. So a lot of people are looking forward to a difficult future. And for some people, they just want peace more than anything else. But for the vast majority of Ukrainians, still wants to continue to fight.
Stefan, thank you very much. I'd like to talk to you again very, very soon. And please stay safe as well, because obviously it's an incredibly dangerous situation that you're in at the minute. Stefan Vichuk there is a journalist that's actually in Kyiv at the moment. Interesting, fascinating to get the views of that particular chap on the ground there, isn't it? I wonder where you would stand on this. Look, hey, I would absolutely hate it, clearly, if someone invaded my sovereign territory. But then at the same time, you've got to be thinking, well, what if he then goes on to nuke us? What if there's even more death and destruction? At what point do maybe the people of Ukraine go, actually, enough's enough now, can we do some kind of deal, even though that probably goes against all of your principles? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Let us know what you think on that. But coming up after this break, we are going to be discussing Iron Man-style jetpacks, that's right, a slight gear shift here, people, being trialled by the Royal Navy as a way of swarming enemy ships. And, yes, they're at it again. Just stop oil, they just won't stop. This morning, the eco-warriors blocked them all outside Buckingham Palace, gluing their hands together in protest against new fossil fuel licences. I will ask their spokesperson, who I believe will be right here in the studio with me, whether or not their actions are really going to make a difference, whether they've crossed the line. But first, it's time, I believe, for your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. And the headlines are: the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, says Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities are a sign of Vladimir Putin's desperation following a series of military setbacks. It comes after officials said at least 11 people had been killed and 64 more injured as the Kremlin launched its biggest airstrike since the start of the war. Tomorrow, G7 leaders will hold urgent talks to discuss their response. Here, the Chancellor has bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original date in mid-November, but today he told the Commons Treasury Committee it will now be published at the end of October. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action ending at 6 o'clock in less than half an hour. And Scotland's First Minister, as you've been hearing, says she's going to hold a Scottish independence referendum on the 19th of October next year if the Supreme Court approves it. Closing the SNP conference in Aberdeen, Nicola Sturgeon said leaving the UK would lead to better relationships with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ms Sturgeon also said an independent Scotland would rejoin the European Union. And the Supreme Court will be hearing legal arguments this week before deciding if Holyrood has the required powers to legislate for a second vote.
The Supreme Court will consider whether the current law allows the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an advisory referendum. If Westminster had any respect at all for Scottish democracy, this court hearing would not be necessary. If the court decides in the way we hope it does, on 19th October next year, there will be an independence referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon, you're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. We're back in just a moment. A quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1041 and €1.1383. If you want to buy an ounce of gold, you'll have to fork out £1,510 and 35 pence. And the FTSE 100 closing today at 6,959.31.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Nicola Sturgeon's very, very long speech at the SNP conference earlier. Stephen says, Scots need a vote to leave the UK. We need a vote to see if we want them to stay. There you go. I mean, that's an interesting one. Where do you stand on this? Where do you think that actually maybe the rest of the UK should get to vote on whether or not to keep Scotland? But Barry says, I have always wanted Scotland to stay with Great Britain, but maybe now is the time for Parliament to cut ties with Scotland. I say build the wall. I think someone might have beaten you to that, actually, to be fair. But build the wall between England and Scotland. Let them go. Let Scotland have the euro, and we pull all our investments out of Scotland and make them have passports. If this is what they want, let them have it. I must say, I've very rarely seen such a one-sided, strong stuff approach from our GB News family here. As it comes to Scottish independence, there we go. Marie says, I don't support saying that Scotland is a foreign country. I don't think like that about England. My grandfather was a good Englishman. I have many English friends. There we go. OK, fair enough. All right, well, we're moving away from that now because the Royal Navy has been trialling an Iron Man-style jetpack that it hopes it can be used to swarm enemy ships. Recently, the suits were shown flying the flag for Britain by soaring over New York Harbour and landing on HMS Queen Elizabeth. The Royal Navy hopes that the jetpacks, which can reach speeds of more than 85 miles an hour, could be used to storm boats in dangerous stealth missions. Joining me to discuss this before we move on to, yes, you heard, Just Stop Oil, who'll be in the studio earlier. A little bit of light relief before that is, of course, the strategic utility of these suits is Brent Sadler, who spent 26 years in the US Navy, is now a senior research fellow at the Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation. Great to have you on the show. We're living in the future, aren't we?
Well, yes, but we're not quite at the age of the Jetsons yet, a very famous cartoon from the 60s and here in the US.
Yes, indeed. OK, so I've actually trialled not one of these jetpacks, but it's called flyboarding in the UK, where you have that on your feet. I was terrible at it, as our GB News viewers will remember from my other show, Friday Night Feast. But this technology now is really great. It could really help forces, couldn't it, to board naval ships, etc. What could it do?
No, I think in the special forces, I think you're right. It has some utility. But the first thing when you watch the videos, this is something that's been in development for about 7 years, or at least the first time it was being put out in public. But it's the overwhelming noise. So it's not going to be a surprise to someone that you're trying to board their ship. But it still has utility where maybe a helicopter or where you can get close enough to get a small team of special forces to get on board a ship quickly. Because the other problem with this is, of course, range. It only can stay aloft for 5 to 10 minutes.
I'm not being funny. I've gone off this quite quickly. So it's so loud that it's not stealthy, and if the boat manages to evade you for 5 minutes, you plummet into the ocean.
That's right. That's probably one of the biggest drawbacks. The other one, of course, is the soldier, or the special force operator, has to have both hands engaged with flying. Can't defend him or herself. So that's another problem. It would be better if you had a hand free, so you could actually have a sidearm to defend yourself as you approach the craft that you're trying to board.
So can I ask what the benefit of this is, apart from the fact that it just looks really cool? Because I was banging up for this a minute ago, and I've gone completely off it now.
No, I think it still has some use, some viability. It needs to be tested a lot. In some cases that come to mind, one, if you needed to insert small forces and you only could get into a place that has high cliffs, so you could launch from a small boat or a submarine and get those into hostile territory. The other, of course, which you're seeing in the videos, is placing on board a hostile vessel that you're trying to take over. But in a situation where the seas are rough and you can't get a helicopter in, you might be able to get close enough to launch a couple of special force operators using this method.
I mean, it looks undeniably cool. If you're listening on radio, have you ever seen Iron Man? It's men with massive jetpacks boarding massive naval ships, and I think we can all picture that. Thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show, Brent. Keep up the good work. Brent Sadler there. Spent 26 years in the US Navy, is now a senior research fellow for naval warfare and advanced technology at the Heritage Foundation, which is a very long business card, one would imagine. So that's rather a lot of words, but there we go. Right, moving away, something a bit closer to home now. So, police made around 25 arrests during an environmental protest, which blocked the mall outside Buckingham Palace. That was earlier this morning. Activists from the group Just Stop Oil sat in the road, some with their hands glued together in protest against new fossil fuel licences, and police managed to clear the road in time for the changing of the guard procession, so there we are. And some of the protesters were also arrested. It comes after Animal Rebellion also held protests in central London at the weekend, calling for a plant-based future. But aside from causing disruption, what are the protests really achieving? Well, joining me in the studio now is James Skeet. He's a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. James, can I shake your hand or will I get stuck to it?
Oh,
no. OK, fair enough. All right. How are you, first of all?
I'm very good. How are you, Patrick?
Yes, I'm OK. Right. Why are you annoying the living heck out of everyone?
Good question. OK, so Just Stop Oil, we're demanding no new licensing and consents for any fossil fuel projects in the United Kingdom. And that's entirely in line with what the International Energy Agency are telling us, what the United Nations are telling us, that there can be no new investment in these things if we want to ensure a safe future for our community.
If there's no new investment, do we not have an issue currently with the current supply level of it? So basically what we would be doing then is having to go to some of the most despotic regimes in the world and give them all of that money as opposed to maybe bringing it home.
I could see how that you may naively think that. However, we've currently got in reserve 8 years of supply. OK, and our main our dependence on international international oil is actually leaving us vulnerable to fluctuations on the international energy market. If we bring investment towards renewables in the United Kingdom, invest in British jobs, we will be ensuring a much safer dependence on our energy supply and ensure, a livable future.
So right now, so Just Stop Oil, clues in the name, OK? If we just stopped oil right now, people, I think, would freeze to death in their own homes, wouldn't they?
That's not what we're calling for. We're not calling for turning off the taps now. As I say, we've got 8 years of supply, OK?
So when do you want to just stop oil? Just to be clear, you don't want to just stop oil right now?
No new licensing.
So no new licensing.
No new licensing consents. Okay. Now, most of the British government will tell you that we need to be investing in drilling in the North Sea. Now, that doesn't belong to the British public. That gets sold on the international energy markets, OK? What would actually help British people with their energy bills today is if we started insulating British homes, we gave free public transport, we got onto renewables. Renewables are 9 times cheaper at the moment. That's the thing that will help people with their bills today.
But the problem is that, I've just been told in my ear anyway, apparently we've only got 5 years of supply here now. saved up already, not 8, right?
Sounds like we've still got plenty of time. I mean, I would need to see your figures.
But have we? Well, I mean, have we actually got time? Because then, you know, does my grandma freeze to death in 5 years' time, not 8? That's a relief.
The fact that, look, we've got every technological capacity to deal with this problem. And the fact is like we have no choice, all right? We're in a situation. Earlier this year, we hit 40 degrees C in this country. That, like, the scientists said that was impossible.
Great. I got a cracking tan.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you thought that, but our farmers didn't think that, OK? Like, this year alone, our wheat yields are down 1/3. We're projected to lose 50% of our potato harvest. If it's this bad in 2022, how bad is 2050 going to look like? Not to mention the fact there's 33 million people displaced in Pakistan right now. What about them?
OK, but how do we actually resolve all of this then? What do we actually do? Can you solve single-handedly the energy crisis, the climate crisis for us?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, well, not me personally, but, you know, what I'd say is, like, there are far better minds working on this than me. I would say that we are looking at the potential for an energy revolution akin to how the internet has been for information, OK? We could have a massive energy abundance, but we need to get off these dinosaur industries that are holding us back. We're getting left in the dust by other countries, you know?
Well, yeah, but are you going the right way about it? Because, to be honest with you, you know, I've met you now, we've had a decent chat, it's all right so far, no one's stuck to anything, and that's lovely. But there were people trying to get to hospital early, there were people whose kids were screaming in the back of their car wanting to get to school, and realistically, that's not the way to bring the people with you, is it?
I mean, obviously, I empathise with anyone sort of disrupted by our... I know. Look, but what I'd say is it's a drop in the ocean. A bit of traffic disruption is a drop in the ocean to the disruption that we've already seen
congestion.
and that is coming along, you know, in the not-too-distant future. Like, we're talking about... Just look at the disruption that happened this year. 60 UK families lost their houses in wildfires, for God's sake. Like, that was unthinkable a few years ago.
OK, so you think that annoying people is currently the best way to get people on side?
Yeah, well, I mean, history's shown time and again that, like, non-violent civil resistance is the most effective means of bringing about the kind of societal shift that we need to see in the sort of time frame that we have left. Unfortunately, annoying people work. I wish holding a placard was as effective.
Well, the thing is it working? Because what have you achieved?
Well, I mean, I'm on your programme talking about the most critical issue.
Yeah, you're talking. That's great.
You know, I mean, I would say in terms of government policy, yes, I agree with you. But I think that highlights the criminality of the UK government. We've got our new sociopath in chief. You know, she used to work for Shell, and she continues to work for Shell. These people, our politicians, work for a billionaire class that do not care about normal people.
Just on that though, because there seems to be. Do you think that fossil fuel companies and these big corporations are inherently evil?
No, I think that...
Because my point on that is just because...
I think they're amoral.
OK, but because the thing is, if it wasn't for them taking it quite a long way back, we wouldn't have had things like the Industrial Revolution. We wouldn't have lifted millions, billions of people out of poverty.
Yeah, I mean, the horse and cart served a purpose to a point as well, right? OK, we need to get out of the dark ages and transition to a sustainable future. It'd be better for everyone. It'd be better for business. It'd be better for all the values we care about. Now, we may disagree on a whole host of political issues, but I'm sure that we all care about our family, we care about our community, and that's what this is about. This is about protecting British people from a government that is committing oblique intent to commit genocide. That would be the legal term. You studied law.
Are you an eco-terrorist?
Look, we've got 80-year-old vicars out there. I'm wearing a flowery shirt. How terrifying do you think we are?
Well, I don't know. Everyone can wear a disguise. No, but seriously, look, you've been to prison.
I have, yeah.
Yes. What was that like?
Very prisony, yeah. It was Belmarsh.
Was it insulated?
Not very well. No, they just kept the heating on all the time. It was very inefficient, I would say.
OK, all right. But seriously, though, you know, do you think that if you... Because my concern, I think a lot of members of the public concern might be, if you guys don't see a big result soon, i.e. get what you want, then you might end up doing anything. You might end up taking it to extremes, blowing something up.
Well, I mean, you raise a relevant point in the sense
because by your logic, sorry, because where does that end? If you're willing to go to increasingly extreme actions until you get what you want, that does end with, as far as I can see, a massive terror attack.
Well, no, I mean, we're willing to do whatever's non-violently necessary. Now, the thing is, you raise a valid point in the sense that history has shown that things have got more extreme with things in the past, with when views are not taken seriously. But we better hope that we don't reach that point. You know, it's a
but you're the spokesperson for it. You are in control of it not reaching that point.
Well, this is why we need non-violent civil resistance.
So you guarantee that it will never turn violent?
Absolutely not. Not by Just Stop Oil, not by any associated group. Like non-violence and peace. And harmony is at the very
center. So if anyone from Just Stop Oil ever did anything that was violent to prove their point, like we've seen with other
They
groups,
wouldn't be in Just Stop Oil.
You'd boot them out.
It just would, we have principles and values that we adhere to, you know, and care for our community. The reason we're doing this is because we care about our community, because we care about our family and our loved ones. I think you do too.
Well, no, we all do. We all do.
You don't care for your community by blowing people up.
Well, I certainly don't. No, but if you were told now, if you were sitting on the Mall, for example, and there was an ambulance that pulled up, and the paramedic got out and said, "This person in the back now."
We have a blue light policy. We let every ambulance through.
Well, what if my girlfriend who was pregnant was in the passenger seat, okay, and she was in labour, and you were glued to the middle of the road or something like that. You were strapped to the middle of the road, and I said, "Please let me pass." Would you let me pass?
We always leave an ambulance lane. We always leave a route through for people in need. I don't want anyone getting hurt, and you know, it's like, this is not my idea of a good time. I don't want to annoy anyone. I don't want to ruin anyone's day. But honestly, like, the situation they're in is so serious, and the fact is the government could stop this in an instant.
It would take a massive upheaval. Just quickly, what do you do every day? What do you work?
I'm a sound engineer.
You are a sound engineer. So do you take time off that to do this?
We all work, yes, yeah. We're you know, this is...
No, I just wondered, because it's not... I don't want to sound like one of those people, you know, the old who funds you question.
Look, we're out there, you've got... I know there's a general sort of perception about us, but, you know, you've got people... You've got nurses, you've got scientists, you've got doctors, you've got vicars, you've got cleaners, waitresses, barmen, you know, people from every walks of life. These are just people that have read the science. And, like, you know, you're an intelligent guy. I'm sure you've read the science.
No one's ever said that. No one's ever gone that
law.
far
You know,
before.
you've got the ability to understand these things. And, you know, like, the entire scientific consensus reinforces what I'm saying. This is not a fringe leftist conspiracy.
I can understand that, but then you could make the argument that one of the points of law is to try to persuade a jury of your case.
That's what we're
not stop them getting to work.
But with all due respect, if that disruption hadn't happened, I wouldn't be on here to make the case. And we've opened a space for the debate to have this. Now, I want to live in a free and fair society.
You're going to have to be quick.
We continue to have these sorts of discussions, but we're not guaranteed the way that we're going at the moment.
All right, good.
Join us 11 o'clock, Downing Street, every day.
I don't know, am I now facilitating the incitement of mass disruption? No, look, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much. Nice to have the chat anyway. And I was going to say good luck, but I just, you know...
We'll see you out. I'll get you a pot of glue.
Get me a pot of glue. There we go. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, those days are behind me. Anyway, right, great to have you on the show. That was, of course, James Skeet there, OK? He's a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. No doubt lots of you will be getting in touch with that, but I'm out of time here. It's time for Jubes & Co. And Jubes has sashayed her way into the studio. Jubes, what's going on?
Yes, I got past the protesters and everything to get myself here. I enjoyed that interview. Good job they don't pull up in front of me or sit in front of me. I'd get them straight off the road, I could tell you that. Anyway, coming up at 6 o'clock on my show, Patrick, Kwasi Kwarteng, he's going to bring his fiscal plans forward. Is this going to silence his critics? Liz Truss, Nicola Sturgeon even, saying she detests the Tories. Why is politics so nasty? I also want to get into Ukraine. Should the UK be doing more? And so-called online paedophile hunters. A police force has asked them to stop. Some people, though, say they are doing an essential public service. Should the police be working with them or not?
Yeah, Michelle, I mean, I must say I'm gripped by that. The online paedophile hunter thing, by the way, I'm glad that you're covering. It's something I've wanted to cover for quite a while. I do find that world, in a way, quite interesting, that these vigilante hunters, really, and then they do tend to get quite a lot of prosecutions, questionable moral arguments about it as well, though. But anyway, yes, I'll be tuning in for that, actually. Michelle, thank you very, very much. Michelle Dewberry there with Jubes & Co. Make sure you stay gripped for that. But loads of you have been getting in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots of people getting in touch with my interview there with the Just Stop Oil spokesperson. John has been on. John says that he doesn't believe there is a climate emergency. Of course, James Skeet, who was with me, will disagree with that. Barry says, ask that guy if he has a job. I did. He is actually a sound engineer, apparently. Loads of you getting in touch. I do wonder, though, actually, what you would all do if somebody did glue themselves in front of the road in front of you whilst you were on your way to work or on your way to an emergency appointment or anything. Goodness gracious me. Wow, I'll tell you what, we've kind of kickstart the week a little bit here, haven't we? Thank you very much to everyone who's watched me here on GB News Live. Well, we had it all, didn't we? We had Nicola Sturgeon prattling on for about an hour, a debate and a discussion about Just Stop Oil, whether or not we should just cut Scotland loose or whether or not we should allow them to have another referendum. And we even went to Kiev and Belarus. What's not to like, people? Thank you very much for joining me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News Live. Up next is the wonderful, the delightful Michelle Dewberry with, I think we can all agree, absolute host of box office stories. I'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a fine afternoon for many places. Sunny spells across a large part of the UK, but some showers have continued, especially towards the northwest of Scotland. That's because we've still got this area of low pressure to the north, and that's driving some unsettled weather into the north and west of Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, northwest England as well. But elsewhere, a ridge of high pressure means that it's been a clear afternoon, and we keep the clear skies across England and Wales overnight with light winds as well. With those clear skies and with light winds, one or two mist and fog patches couldn't be ruled out. And actually temperatures will fall away. It's looking like a chilly night in places, especially through central parts of England and Wales. In some shelter spots, 1 or 0 Celsius possible first thing. Not so cold for northern and western Scotland. Here, thicker cloud and 7 or 8 Celsius more likely, with showers continuing overnight and into the start of Tuesday. Now, the showers in western Scotland will be replaced by more prolonged spells of rain into Tuesday afternoon, and that rain just brushing the far north of Northern Ireland. A few more showers to come for southern Scotland and northern England, but otherwise, for the southern half of the UK, sunny spells once again. And with light winds, 16 Celsius in the south will feel quite pleasant, 13 or 14 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, as we end Tuesday, we'll see more prolonged and some heavier bursts of rain coming along into Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, as well as Northern England and North Wales. The rain on and off, I think, in many places. It's going to be most persistent towards the far northwest. And to the southeast, well, here we keep the clear spells, and it'll be another chilly night with temperatures mid to low single figures in places. A bright start to the day for the Midlands, East Anglia, the southeast. I think we keep the bright skies here for much of Wednesday, but elsewhere we'll see this band of rain toppling south into northern England, eventually North Midlands and North Wales. It will eventually peter out, but more unsettled weather on the way for Thursday and Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB,